Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The cameras are rolling and the microphones are on. We will begin this evening with a special city council meeting. I kindly ask that our recording secretary please reflect that the entire council is present. On the special city council meeting are just two brief items. Number one, approve resolution number 2015-58, authorizing execution of intergovernmental agreement with the Illinois Department of Transportation for routine road maintenance of State Route 25, 31, and 38.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Marks, seconded by Bruno. Any questions or comments for our director, Mr. Babica? Alderman Singer?
Thank you, Mayor. Richard, the annual payment of close to $80,000, and there's a provision for a cost agreement of, what, 2.5%? Is that based on will that be based annually?
It's a variable rate that's based within an engineer's published rule book for that calendar year, what the projected costs are, and the IDOT based them off of that, so it can fluctuate every year from as low as 0 all the way up to really upwards of a number. There really is no cap on that.
This contract will be for what period of time?
It's a 10-year contract, so
10 years. Do you know what the amount that IDOT was paying the city prior to this point?
it was just, Tom Dahl and I had a discussion about that. I believe it was just over $78,000.
About 2.7% or so than what's in here the first year. It's about 78,000.
Okay.
It does increase about 2.5–3% every year.
All right. The other question is in the basis of the letter from Mr. Fortman, and then going on down to the Illinois Department of Transportation, there is a total comprehensive amount of $914,000, which is estimated. Explain that to me.
I would say that's over the whole 10-year contract. They're estimating at about 2.5% every year. So the total cost, without knowing what that percentage would be about 900,000.
So it encompasses a 10-year period?
Correct. So they're saying at the end of the 10 years, it would be about $900,000.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that explanation, Richard. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else from the dais? No additional questions or comments? Madam Recording Secretary, please take the roll call.
Mike Bruno,
Aye.
Kara Burkhardt,
Aye.
Donald Cummings.
Aye.
Dean Kilburg.
Aye.
Craig Maladra.
Aye.
Richard Marks.
Aye.
Jim Radecki.
Aye.
Tom Simonian.
Aye.
Mary Sino.
Aye.
Ron Singer.
Aye.
Mr. Mayor, if you would so indulge me.
Yes, sir.
I just also would like to take this opportunity to update the city council. Earlier today, myself and the city engineer had a meeting with IDOT regarding the road diet. And, follow-up questions to what were raised by the city council at the last council meeting. IDOT has agreed to undertake independent traffic counts, both at the entrances for Houghton Mifflin as well as the Burns parcel. Both entrances there, as well as at Fabian and Route 31. And then they will share that data with myself and Brian, hopefully as soon as they've got it digested. And then we'll be able to move forward with addressing the concerns of the city council and the property owners within that corridor.
Thank you.
Mr. Simonian?
Thank you, Mayor. Does this mean we have to hold off on this next piece that's due to the IDOT until they give us some direction?
No, sir, because the next agenda item is tidying up the feasibility report into the approved or preferred IDOT APR, the abbreviated product report. Thank you, whoever threw me that life ring there. And at that point in time, what information it's going through with IDOT with these traffic counts is merely an attempt to either validate and prove that the city council's request and the property owner's requests are valid, or if there's other issues that still need to be resolved.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions or comments for Mr. Babica? Item number 2 is to approve resolution number 2015-59, authorizing execution of a proposal from Semcon Limited to complete an abbreviated project report associated with the Illinois Route 31 road diet for the Illinois Department of Transportation's review and consideration.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Marks, seconded by Singer. Questions or comments regarding this matter? Alderman Simonian.
Thank you, Mayor. As promised from last week's meeting, I wanted to follow up on the information that I did not provide until I got permission to provide. I just want to share with everybody a quick history of this project and to expose the transparency. In 2005, the City Council adopted and approved a bike plan that included a plan/recommendation for a road diet for Route 31. In 2013, I was appointed to the City Council, and that same year, I was approached by one of my neighbors, Bob Fitzsimmons, who was very interested in pursuing the adopted 2005 City Council bike plan with regards to the Route 31 road diet. Bob had invested his own money to have an initial study done as to whether the Route 31 road diet that would include bike paths to connect to the Fox River Bike Trail was feasible. Bob's initial feasibility results were positive and asked to get my support, to meet and get my support. Met with Bob and quickly realized that my knowledge of this subject matter was lacking, need to bring in some more knowledgeable individuals. Set up a meeting with fellow Alderman Craig Maladra, who was part of that 2005 bike plan, Mike Donahue, who was our Kane County rep, and between the four of us, we agreed that it was worth taking the next steps to find out what the pulse of both the city, council, and the local citizens were. In 2014, I sent out approximately 245 homes that were either attached to or parallel to Route 31, briefly explaining the road diet concept and inviting anyone who's interested to attend a meeting. We received approximately 65 RSVPs, and approximately that many folks attended the meeting, along with myself, Alderman Maladra, Representative Donahue, and the mayor. After that meeting, it was agreed upon that there was adequate interest in pursuing the concept. IDOT was notified to find out what would be required in order to restripe Route 31 for a road diet. IDOT said they would require support from the City of Geneva and submission of a Phase 1 engineering plan. When presented for support by the City Council, it was unanimously agreed upon that the City Council was in support of moving forward so long as no taxpayer dollars were used to pay for the Phase 1 engineering plan. I shared this information with Bob Fitzsimmons, and together we were able to secure the necessary contributions for the initial Phase 1 engineering plan, follow-up plan, and the final study that is now due, IDOT. Those contributions were made by Bob Fitzsimmons, Larry Geese Jr., Gerard Keating, and Fred and Bonnie Hackendall, all whom are residents of the 5th Ward of Geneva. I personally paid for the postage to send the invites to the for the public meeting, as well as the appetizers, soda, and juice at that public meeting. I have made the City Council aware of each and every step of this process and have been accessible to each City Council member and citizen to answer any questions. Not once did any council member or citizen of Geneva request that I share the information about the citizens who so generously paid to get the Route 31 road diet accomplished. Instead, a couple of councilmen felt it necessary last week to blindside me to share the names of those most generous and fortunate contributors, which I was not unwilling to do. I just wanted to get their permission prior to sharing that information. The same thing I would do as a courtesy to anyone. Instead of accepting that answer and allowing me to get the generous citizens' names to share with the City Council and public, the councilman felt it necessary to make the generosity of those citizens who contributed like they were part of a special task force or special interest group with some ulterior motive. This generous group of citizens were provided no review authority, editorial authority, or any leadership role on developing the plan. The City of Geneva was the one that directed the entire process and had direct contact with IDOT and the engineering firms. This generous group of contributors' ulterior motive was to connect the Fox River Bike Path, public health, safety, and welfare of the users of Route 31 and the citizens of Geneva. All this with not one dime coming from the taxpayers and 100% coming from their generosity. It is a shame that fortunate citizens willing to share for the benefit of their fellow citizens in the city have to be perceived as having ulterior motives. After all said and done, depending upon this final study, the group will have contributed between $50,000 to $60,000. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman. Anyone else questions regarding the matter that's been motioned and seconded? The motion by Marks, the second by Singer. A roll call vote is in order. Madam Recording Secretary, please take the roll.
Mike Bruno,
Aye.
Tara Burkhardt. Aye. Donald Cummings.
Aye.
Dean Kilburg.
Aye.
Craig Maladra.
Aye.
Richard Marks.
Aye.
Jim Radecki.
Aye.
Tom Simonian.
Aye.
Mary Sino. Aye. Ron Singer.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Babica. Not on the agenda tonight, but of keen interest to all of us, I will entertain a motion to waive the fees for the special city council meeting.
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Mark, seconded by Bruno. A voice vote is sufficient. All in favor of waiving the fees, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. A motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Motion by Simonian, seconded by Sino.
Mr. Mayor, if I may?
Yes, sir.
On behalf of the American Legion Post 71, we would like to thank the mayor and the city council, as well as all the participants in yesterday's Memorial Day activities, and it was highly appreciated, and we thank you so much for that. And the effort that you show towards our veterans is very gratifying. And I'm a Korean War veteran myself, and I thank you for that kind of consideration and thoughtfulness. I truly appreciate that, as well do my colleagues as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. The motion to adjourn has been offered and seconded. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
The special city council meeting is adjourned. The microphones will be turned off just momentarily. Folks, we begin our regularly scheduled Committee of the Whole meeting. This meeting is called to order. Let the record show that all the aldermen are present this evening. We have a full agenda tonight. We're glad all of you are here for Swedish Day's consideration. Approval of the minutes of the May 11th, 2015.
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Bruno, seconded by Marks. Any questions or comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion's approved. Items of business, item 3A, recommend approval of special event application for the Geneva Chamber of Commerce, Festival of the Vine, September 11 through 13, 2015.
So moved.
Second.
Sino makes the motion, Marks makes the second. Any questions or comments for our chamber representatives who are with us this evening? Hearing none, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Item 3B is to recommend approval of special event application for the Geneva Chamber of Commerce for the Arts Fair, July 25 through 26, 2015.
So moved.
Alderman Sino makes the motion
Second.
with extraordinary gusto, and Bruno makes the second. Questions or comments for, again, the chamber? Hearing none, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Item 3B passes unanimously. Item 3C is to recommend approval of a special event application for Power in Faith LLC for use of parking spaces and right-of-way on South 3rd Street at Dodson, June 10, 2015, pending final approval from property owner Shodine Management. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Cummings, seconded by Singer. Any questions or comments regarding this matter? I think the operative word is this approval is conditioned upon Shodine Management's approval as well. Hearing none, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Item 3C passes unanimously. Item 3D is to recommend draft ordinance amending Title IV, Business Licensing, Chapter 2, Liquor Control, adding one Class A5 liquor license for Foxfire Tavern LLC.
So moved.
Second.
Marks makes the motion and Singer makes the second. Any questions or comments regarding this matter? Hearing none, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Item 3D passes unanimously. Item 3E is to recommend a draft resolution authorizing the execution of fiscal year 2014-2015 budget amendments as presented.
So moved.
Motion by Marks,
Second.
seconded by Sino. Any questions or comments for the Chief Budget Officer and/or our Finance Manager? Hearing none, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Item 3E passes unanimously. Item 3F is to recommend approval of Certificate of Completion for the Prairie Ridge subdivision.
So move.
Motion by Kilberg, seconded by Singer. Any questions or comments regarding this matter? The Prairie Ridge subdivision is actually in Oak Lawn. Everybody on their toes. Hearing none, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Item 3F passes unanimously. Item 3G is to recommend draft resolution authorizing the execution of a 5-year agreement with HLR for wetland mitigation management at a cost not to exceed $19,980.
So move.
Second.
Singer makes the motion, and Simonian makes the second. Any questions or comments for Mr. DeGroot? Seeing none, hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Item G passes unanimously. Item H is to recommend draft resolution authorizing execution of a contract with Baxter and Woodman Consulting for evaluation of Short Street sanitary sewer siphon. That is alliteration, isn't it?
Yeah.
At an estimated cost of $28,780 with an additional work rate of $665 per hour. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Marks
Second.
makes the motion. Bruno makes the second. Questions or comments from the dais? Alderman Marks.
I guess my question is, it's an estimated cost with the additional work rate. Do we expect a lot of additional work here, or is,
I don't think so, but our concern is that since there really hasn't been an evaluation done on this siphon since its inception in the 1950s, we're not too, certain of its condition, but we don't believe it's going to take a whole lot of cleaning. But we'll, be, making sure that we stay within our, overall budget. So, we just wanted to put it in there, so you can, be cognizant of it. We're going to be, good stewards of our fund, but we didn't want to have to come back here for, wanting to continue the cleaning and everything else while they're still going, so.
going on? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Alderman Bruno.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you're not suspecting any major structural issues? You think it's just,
I don't know about structural. I'm hoping that we don't have, obviously a bunch of leaks from the river coming in. It's just to get an assessment. If we were having major issues, I think we'd be having problems any day of the week. So, not
Thank
during
you.
rain events.
Anyone else from the dais? For those of you tuning in at home and here with us live, this is Bob Van Gescam, our Superintendent of Water and Wastewater. The guy who created the alliteration on the agenda.
That's right. Just for you.
Just, no additional questions or comments? All in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Item H passes unanimously. Thank you, Bob. Item I is to recommend draft resolution authorizing a 3-year contract with Rempe Sharp and Associates for wastewater treatment plant stormwater permit engineering services for an hourly rate not to exceed $4,582 per year. Motion by Maladra, seconded by
Second.
Simonian. Any questions or comments from Mr. Van Gescam? Seeing none, hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Item I passes unanimously. Thanks again, Bob. Item J is consider draft ordinance. Yes, forgive me. If no one objects, I'm going to move item K before item I, so we can dispatch of that relatively easily. Now I just jinxed it. Item K is to recommend ordinance number 2015-09, amending Title IV, Business and Licensing Regulations, Chapter 2, Liquor Control, Section 4-2-11, Classifications, and 4-2-12, Outdoor Seating License of the Geneva City Code.
So moved.
Motion by Cummings,
Second.
seconded by Simonian. Any questions or comments? This was discussed at some length a few weeks ago. It was clarified in multiple correspondence with the city administrator's office and others. Alderman Cummings.
I have a few issues with this after talking to some of the business owners that I wanted to bring up, and then also some thoughts myself on this. I don't think that in this ordinance we're addressing natural barriers enough. I'm worried that natural barriers aren't being defined clearly, and that perhaps the way that they are being defined is going to lead to problems in the future when we have a place like Aurelios or Villa Verone that does have a natural barrier that may not be see-through, and then we'll run into issues. And I don't think we should run into issues with an outdoor seating area like Villa Verone or Aurelios. I'm also a little worried about the existing fencing at 318. I don't know that that's been clearly addressed. I almost think that perhaps we should give them special dispensation. I don't think that that's well enough addressed in here. Barrier design, there's a little bit of an issue in definition. We talk about fence material and we talk about post material, but those are two different, probably clerical, but different verbiage in both. And I'm worried about that. The fabric inserts, I don't know how people feel about that. If people are against fabric inserts, then let's leave fabric inserts in the ordinance as being excluded, but I don't necessarily have a problem with them. I'm also worried about the fencing, the solid fencing around places like Stockholm's in the back, on the back patio. Technically, that is probably out of ordinance with this ordinance, with the height of that fencing and the okay.
Microphone.
Let's have Alderman Cummings recite all of the concerns, and we can answer them one by one if you'd like.
That's all right.
I'm a little bit concerned about Urban Grill, the brick, what used to be Urban Grill, the brick planter there. That if we plant some plants in there, we have a visibility problem. I understand the police not wanting something that's invisible from the street, blocked from the street, but perhaps there's something we could do better in the ordinance about that visibility. And then overall, we do have one mention in here of the visibility of the fencing, and it addresses people that have a license previous to this. Last time we spoke, we talked about fencing getting grandfathered. If it doesn't fit ordinance, maybe it gets grandfathered for a year, for 2 years. I would suggest that grandfathered means grandfathered. If we asked somebody 2 years ago to adhere to the law, and 2 years ago they adhered to the law, and we are hopefully constantly improving the law, I don't think, in all fairness, that we can ask someone that followed the law 2 years ago to then get rid of their equipment and buy new. Not in a year, not in 2 years, not in 5 years, not ever. When they replace it, then I think we ask them to follow the ordinance, but until then, I don't think it's fair to the business owners. We have a position like that with water, with electric. If I have cotton-wrapped wire in my building from 1880, I don't have to go in and pull that wiring out as the law changes, unless I'm doing substantial rehab to the building. I would say fencing is a lot less of a life safety issue than wiring in a building, and so I really think we should let the business owners keep the equipment that they have until they replace it. In other words, grandfathered means completely grandfathered. So those are the suggestions I have.
Mrs. McKittrick.
I agree.
Okay, moving on then. We can,
No, seriously.
Down this moment.
Thank you. We did try to address those concerns in here, and make sure that, well, first of all, I believe it was Alderman Kilberg's suggestion, we did send out the draft ordinance and asking all 30 of our license holders to review it and to give us feedback. We did hear from one of them with a suggestion because of his particular circumstances, and we did make that change in here, and it was the doorway, or the ingress egress width. And so we incorporated that. But we did talk about the fence, and we're not aware of anyone that's out of compliance at this point in time with fencing, barriers, and we did try to leave the wording so that it was flexible, but also as approved by the city. Somebody has to make that final decision, and we send our fire department, our building department, our police department out for the inspections. So we felt that they were the experts. They're the ones that need to make the decision on whether or not it's visible enough from the street, whether it meets our building and zoning ordinances, and whether it is appropriate as far as fire safety goes. So we tried to make the language flexible enough to address that with those folks making the final decision, but giving that flexibility to the property owners, and again, asking for their input. The little feedback that I did get, it was positive in saying that another license holder did contact us and say, thank you, it looks great. I'm in favor of it. So we didn't get any other suggestions to change it. And the one change suggestion we did get, we did make that. So we are looking at grandfathering in as far as the openness of the design right now, because that's something new. The rest of it, there is no one out of compliance that we're aware of, so there's really no need to grandfather anyone in. And what we did is we expanded on what we had. We didn't make it more restrictive, we made it less restrictive. As far as Urban Grill, I'm not sure that should be an issue, because I think that there's plenty of height variance that they would have room to put the plants in the planter, if I'm understanding what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a solid planter, maybe
Right.
48 inches high,
Right.
solid brick. We get a 3-foot plant in there, a 2-foot plant, and then we're bumping up into.
Well, this is, plants may not exceed a height of 72 inches above the level of the ground. So again, you're getting to the 6-foot height, which is comparable to the fencing. So I don't think that most plantings are going to be over 6 feet high, and again, you want it comparable, I would think, with whatever the fence height is. So I think that that's reasonable. 6 feet off of the ground. I can't think of an instance in town where the plantings would be over 6 feet. So we did look at the licenses that we had, and trying to make sure that none of them were out of compliance with what we were writing, and we were trying to make it more flexible. So that was reason for my quick response to you, is I agree, and that was our goal in writing these into the ordinance. And I do believe that we've addressed that, because like I said, we sent it out to all of the 30 license holders and only really heard back from a couple of them, one saying that it looked really good and he was in favor, and the other making a suggestion, which we incorporated.
I think some of the license holders responded to individual aldermen, rather
Okay.
than coming back to the city. That was my impression. And I don't know why, I didn't ask why, I just.
Okay, well, I didn't get any feedback from the alderman to incorporate in it, I guess, so.
Yeah, I didn't get it in time to send that. Item 3I, sectional fencing. Sectional fencing must be of metal, and then that's described as aluminum, steel, iron, or similar, or of wood or composite. But if we get into posts, let's see, wood, we should probably add composite in there. Guessing that's just oversight.
It says
words-
or of wood or composite construction, right?
Yeah, for sectional fencing,
In the post.
Right,
3I does
okay.
mention composite.
okay.
Section 3, not I, 2, underneath it says posts, doesn't talk about
Or
composite.
composite,
And I thought if somebody wants to make have fence, a fence and fence posts should probably be the same material. Composite isn't mentioned under posts, it is mentioned under fencing. We should either have it in both areas or neither. I would prefer both.
okay.
I would consider that a friendly amendment. There's no need for a
Yeah, that would be good.
If no one objects, I would accept Alderman Cummings' recommendation with respect to the material on the post as a friendly amendment. No action necessary. If you don't object, we'll just make that addition to the definition.
Sure, please, thank you.
Anything else, Alderman Cummings?
No, not yet.
Alderman Simonian?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things. What recourse does after this, what recourse does a business owner have if the city denies them? Denies them of their quote-unquote fencing plan or barrier plan? Do they have a right to come before the city council and get that overruled?
Well, I suppose any citizen or business owner has a right to come before the city council. I suppose my question would be, denied for what? It depends on what the denial is based on. If something is denied because of these regulations, the outdoor seating regulations in particular, I mean, we would try to work with them, just like when there was the misunderstanding, with one of the other businesses, and our police department went over and measured and said, no, you're in compliance, it's just fine. So sometimes those denials aren't really denials, maybe it's just a misunderstanding, so we would try to work with them. The code is the code. I mean, is there an appeal process? No, there isn't. It's like any other code in the city code of ordinances.
The only reason I ask is because we've run into so many different issues with this. There are so few of these licenses, but each one of them has its own, its own unique situation, whether it's arborvitae's or a brick wall or whatever may be the case, that it just seems like there's nothing you can do that's going to encompass every scenario so I'm just trying to get an opportunity for that business owner to either appeal or come to before the council and say, a 10-foot wall of arborvitae's, although it's not 72 inches, doesn't make sense to cut it down to 6 feet to satisfy this, that maybe we should look at that as a situation by situation. And I don't know
Well-
if we can do that, but I'm just making that suggestion because of the unique nature of this particular ordinance.
Well, and we did try to address that specifically under B1. The last section of that says, such outdoor seating areas shall be clearly designated with a permanent or semi-permanent fence and/or barrier consistent with the existing zoning and building ordinance of the city code and as approved by the city. So that "and as approved by the city," again, is our fire and our police and our building officials going out there looking at the particular situation, and that's why we put that language in there, so that they had some flexibility in those particular cases, maybe where it doesn't exactly fit. So it is already built into that.
Guess I'm good.
Anyone else from the dais?
I would request too that if we could create some sort of very transparent, clear document to hand out to a person that applies for the outdoor seating license for liquor. Still referencing, saying, you know, when push comes to shove, it's the ordinance that counts, not this document. But something that's clear, I think would go a long way in preventing some of the issues that come up.
But we do have that already. I mean, we do have a handout that we provide, and we've had a couple of workshops where we go walk through the liquor code, so.
That would be that sort of thing, I think, is very helpful. It stops things before they start.
But yeah, we can take a look at it and see if we can update it or improve it, and obviously add anything new to it.
Thank you.
Right, right. Yes, and as you refer to my executive summary, I do talk about adding photos to the city code as well. So that was another attempt for us to make clearer exactly what we were talking about. So.
Alderman Sino?
You mentioned fire, you've mentioned police, you mentioned the building code people. I mean, who ultimately has the final, who comes, you know, maybe they're not all in agreement, or one thinks this, or,
The liquor commissioner.
okay.
A liquor license will not be issued until all parties have signed off on the appropriate life safety issues.
Well, I'm thinking more of when comes time when they want to put the new fence up on a existing fence or something like that. Just seems like we've had a lot of miscommunication amongst that part of it.
Good, bad, or indifferent, that rests with me.
Okay.
More bad than good. It rests with me. So,
All right, thank you.
anyone else on the dais? Anyone in the audience? Yes, Mr. Olson, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well.
Welcome.
Michael Olison, the owner of Stockholms. I reside at 202 North 6th Street in Geneva. First of all, I'd like to thank you all or Mary specifically, for sending out the package. I was the one that responded. My only issue and concern is, and thank you very much for addressing the fact that my fence, as I read the initial proposal, did not meet the openness requirement. It is 72 inches high. I've got 12 inches of open space, so 83% of it is closed. What I would love to see is instead of the wording variance will be allowed for an existing, patios, is that the variance will be granted so that there can be no confusion on that going forward. Unlike the other restaurants, my patio looks out over a wonderful backyard area of garbage cans and grease traps, and I'd just as soon keep that hidden.
It's part of the charm, Michael.
Yeah, I know. We could put a picture of you up there, Mary, and,
That would
really,
ruin-
really do
What
it.
is this? What's so funny, Simone?
Joke I heard a couple hours ago. Just got it.
So you want the language changed from will be allowed to will be granted?
Yes, it just so that it's firm, there's no ifs, ands, or buts, so that, if some future guy, an inspector 2 years from now can't say, hey, wait a second, I want this changed.
They allowed it, but I'm not going to. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Any objection from the committee of the whole regarding that language change?
Good point.
Friendly amendments suffices? Notes have been... Anything else, Mr. Olson?
No, just once again, I thank Mary very much for giving us the opportunity to look at this in advance.
Thank you very much. We have just a couple of friendly amendments that were included. The motion was offered by Cummings. It was seconded by Singer. Any additional questions or comments regarding this item? All in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Item J, I'm going to ask for a motion to put this on the floor, then I would like to make a brief statement before we begin deliberations, discussions.
Second.
The heck, man, I didn't even read it.
You did J.
J, yeah. Consider draft ordinance related to the city-initiated text amendments to the Geneva Historic Preservation Ordinance regarding formatting, procedural and regulatory change to Title III, Chapter 3, and Title 10, Chapter 6 of the Geneva City Code.
So moved.
Bruno makes the motion.
Second.
Cummings makes the second. We'll give him a chance again. As all of you probably know, or at least hope you know, this meeting is being broadcast on Channel 10 on Comcast, Channel 99 on AT&T UVerse, and it's also being streamed live on the city's website. Despite the standing room only conditions, we chose not to seek a different venue because we would not be able to broadcast the meeting live if we did. Hence, the perhaps a little bit uncomfortable situation. So thanks for your patience and endurance, as it were. Please note, the exits are to your right. The restrooms are to your right. There's coffee in the back room. You're free to move about just like Southwest Airlines, so we anticipate a long evening. The format for this evening will be as follows. There will be a presentation by our Director of Community Development, Mr. David DeGroot, seated to my left, along with our Historic Planner, Mr. Michael Lambert, seated to my right. Following that presentation, we will invite those who have signed the Wish to Speak list an opportunity to ask questions, provide comments, seek clarification, or what have you. Following citizens' comments, I will then ask the Committee of the Whole if they have any comments, questions, clarifications to ask as well. No person shall be granted a second chance to speak unless and until all who wish to speak have been invited to do so. No interruptions of speakers will be tolerated. The chair, I, have the authority, privilege, and responsibility to gavel anyone to order, and will do so if a speaker is out of turn, offers irrelevant commentary, and/or personal accusations toward their neighbors, staff, or elected officials. And that same caveat, of course, applies to the Committee of the Whole members as well. All persons who are invited to speak are kindly asked to state their name, spelling their last name, and provide their address as well at the podium. A reminder to our Committee of the Whole members, please speak directly into your microphones, and equally important, please turn off your microphones if you are engaged in any sidebar conversations, as said conversations are picked up by the broadcast and oftentimes interfere with the dialogue taking place in front of us. In anticipation of a full debate, I have chosen to announce now that this meeting will not continue past 10 o'clock. But instead, I will entertain a motion at 9:55 to continue this meeting until the next regularly scheduled Committee of the Whole, which is Monday, June the 8th. Lastly, please understand that my role this evening is to facilitate the discussion between and among all of us, and I will exercise my best judgment in doing so, as well as utilize all the tools necessary under Robert's Rules of Order. So I ask for your patience and understanding as we commence. We have a motion and a second to bring this matter to the floor. We begin, as so stated, by a presentation by our Director of Community Development, Mr. David DeGroot. Welcome, Mr. DeGroot.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, tonight we are discussing a complete rewrite of a ordinance that is now 20 years old. It has expanded from 10 pages to 51 pages. There has been about 12 hours or more of public discussion prior to tonight's meeting. So I just ask you to bear with me as I try to be brief and concise in giving an overview, but it will take a little bit of time to get through. I would like to start the discussion by providing a brief background and reviewing the process that brought us here this evening. I would like to then discuss the purpose and goals of rewriting the ordinance, followed by a quick review of some of the key changes that are proposed. And then most of the presentation this evening will focus on the key changes that have generated quite a bit of public discussion. This is by way of background. The 2 historic districts were established independently and listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1979 and 1982. The city of Geneva designated a local historic district in 1987, which included both the National Register districts and expanded upon them. Today, there's approximately 730 structures within the district, and there's an additional 5 properties that are landmarked outside of the district. The first historic preservation ordinance was adopted in 1982. It was amended then in 1987 when the newly created local historic district was established, and that was to address the new district and to address procedural omissions. The ordinance was then completely rewritten again in 1995 to kind of standardize our processes and practices, and it has not been updated since then. The first vision of the city's adopted strategic plan is to recognize, honor, preserve, and enhance our community character and heritage. One of the goals listed under that vision is to explore regulations and resources that examine preservation and rehabilitation of historic properties. It's under that guidance of the strategic plan that the Community Development Department, specifically the Planning Division, made it a goal to update the city's historic preservation ordinance to address a number of items, including demolition permit application review criteria, details on landmark designation processes, required documentation for buildings that have been approved for demolition, and much more. Michael Lambert is the city's preservation planner. He has done the heavy lifting on this project. He's done an incredible amount of research that dates back to May of 2013. He's prepared several drafts of the ordinance for review and discussion by staff prior to being considered at Historic Preservation Commission public meetings, which began back in February. He's amended the draft ordinance several times throughout that process to address comments from the commission and from the public. I'm presenting this evening because, as we know, his position is a part-time position, and he's had some unexpected time out of the office over the last few weeks, so I've assumed the responsibility of preparing this presentation and asked him to focus on being prepared to answer questions. As with any project, it's important that staff have a clear purpose and set of goals when rewriting the ordinance. The draft ordinance aims to clarify certain provisions and procedural requirements, codify current practice and policy, correct contradictory clauses, address evolving needs and concerns, create a user-friendly document, balance the inherent goals of historic preservation as a community value with the concern for respecting the right of due process for individual stakeholders, and finally, to maintain Geneva's status as a certified local government. And I'd like to expand upon that last point just a little bit. Geneva has been recognized as a certified local government, or a CLG, since 1997 by the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency. To become a CLG, a government must have a preservation ordinance, must establish a preservation review commission, must have an active and local survey program to identify historic resources for landmark or historic district designation, must provide for public participation in due process. The CLG program gives Geneva an opportunity to participate in state and federal preservation activities. For example, CLGs may participate in state and federal incentive programs such as a 20% income tax credit for the substantial rehab of income-producing properties, a property tax assessment freeze for the substantial rehab of owner-occupied principal residences. CLGs are also eligible for matching grant funds to assist with local programs such as surveys, preservation plans, and public education. Staff did submit the draft ordinance that's before you tonight to the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency for their review and comment, and they have confirmed that the proposed changes would not jeopardize our status as a certified local government. So getting back to the key changes, the purpose and the goals, there's about a dozen key changes to the ordinance, which include reorganization of the ordinance for easy reference and understanding, expansion of the terms and definitions, identification of required materials for nomination, restructuring of the nomination filing process, including recognition of owner consent, identification of applicable fees for nominations, clarification of standards for review of nominations, identification of notification requirements when properties are nominated, identification of project review timeframes, which overall have been reduced, summation of the submittals required for work proposed on designated properties, clarification of standards for review of proposed work on designated properties, and the introduction of regulations for conservation districts, demolition of historic properties, and relief due to economic hardship. On May 19th, the Historic Preservation Commission recommended approval of the proposed amendments as presented to you this evening. Staff also recommends approval of the ordinance as presented this evening. Again, overall, the ordinance went from 10 pages to 51 pages. The great majority of the ordinance was approved with very little discussion. There were, however, a few topics related to landmark and historic district designation that generated quite a bit of discussion, and those include owner consent, notification, fees, suspension of work. The introduction of neighborhood conservation districts also generated quite a bit of discussion and some questions from the alderman. What I would like to do at this point is kind of go through each one of these public discussion items, compare the existing ordinance to the proposed ordinance, summarize the concerns we've heard on each of those, and then provide the rationale for the recommendations in the ordinance. The first is on landmark designation and the issue of owner consent. The existing ordinance does not require anything more than a simple majority vote from the City Council to approve an application for landmark designation where the owner has not consented. The draft ordinance would require a 2/3 majority vote if the property is nominated without the owner's consent. The concerns we've heard is that allowing a landmark designation without owner consent is an infringement upon property owners' rights. It also imposes an expense on a property owner who wishes to challenge the nomination. Looking at the rationale for retaining the ability to landmark without owner consent, in the proposed ordinance, a pre-application meeting is required for all nominations. The applicant at that time is encouraged to seek owner consent. All fees are waived if there is owner consent, so there is a financial incentive to obtain it. A 2/3 majority vote is an added layer of protection. Landmark designation without owner consent is a tool in the preservation toolbox. It is one that is rarely used, should be discouraged, but may need to be used as a last resort. For instance, it would provide protection for properties that are owned or controlled by somebody that is not local or not locally invested in the community. For instance, an absentee landlord or a bank that does not have an interest in maintaining the property, just a financial interest in moving the property. Due to the added protection for the property owner and the rare circumstance when a property may need to be landmarked without consent, the Historic Preservation Commission and staff recommended retaining the ability to landmark without owner consent in the unfortunate event that it's needed. The Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, in their letter, supported the provision requiring a 2/3 majority vote in cases where the property owner does not consent landmark designation. The existing ordinance is also silent on the issue of consent for a proposed historic district, which means a historic district can be established by a simple majority vote regardless of the amount of opposition from the property owners within the district. The proposed ordinance would provide an ability for property owners in a proposed district to object. And if more than 51% of those property owners objected, the application would be automatically withdrawn. The application would be defeated and not forwarded to City Council for further review. The concerns we've heard on this issue is that allowing district designation without consent is an infringement on property owners' rights. We've also heard that requiring owners to fill out forms provided by the Community Development Department is overly burdensome for objections. The main concern we've heard is that education should be used to build 51% support to establish a district rather than opposition to defeat a district, which would be a much more positive approach. The rationale for Historic Preservation Commission and staff's recommendation is that requiring an objection instead of support is consistent with zoning law and practice, and unfortunately the reality is that it's also easier to do. Opponents to a proposed law or proposed development tend to show up and have their voices heard, where those who are in support or are indifferent tend to stay home, and that's certainly been my experience in my time. As proposed, 51% objection would automatically defeat a proposed district, so it's a pretty strong tool in the ordinance to defeat a district. Staff recommends that a standardized form should be used for objections so they can be easily verified. Again, the idea of building support instead of requiring opposition is a noble one. However, the Historic Preservation Commission and staff would work hard to educate property owners through public information meetings if a district is proposed, engage support at that time. Requiring support could also lead to gerrymandering of districts, manipulating the boundaries to make sure you have 51% support instead of focusing on boundaries that are defined by a development pattern or historic landmarks. Another one of the items of discussion was on landmark designation and owner notification. The existing ordinance only requires that the property owner is notified within 10 days of the public hearing before the Historic Preservation Commission on the nomination. The proposed ordinance would require that the owner is notified by certified mail within 5 working days of filing of the application being filed. Some of the concerns we've heard regarding notification is that it should be immediate. Owners should also be notified when somebody inquires about nominating their property, not just when an application is filed. Owners should not be surprised by receiving notice in the mail once an application has been filed. Aldermen should be notified immediately of any application or inquiry. Not requiring notification immediately or with inquiries gives the applicant a clear advantage, giving them as much time as they need to build a case prior to filing an application. And looking at the rationale for the recommendation, again, there is a pre-application meeting that is built into the ordinance that is required. Applicants are again encouraged to seek owner consent. There is the financial incentive of having your fees waived if there is owner consent. As you all know, the aldermen are updated on a regular basis with any pending applications or even contemplated projects. Notification within 5 days would allow staff to review the application and determine if it's even worth pursuing. For example, an applicant may believe a house to be a Frank Lloyd Wright property, but it may not be. Or they may believe property is worthy of nomination, but upon review, it's evident that there's been too many changes to the original structure and it would not qualify for a historic landmark. In those instances, staff could review the application and talk to the applicant about pursuing it any further instead of contacting the property owner and causing alarm for an application that's likely not to go anywhere. 5 days also gives staff, which right now we know is a part-time position, the opportunity to prepare good information for the property owner in the event that it is a valid application. Staff feels that 5 days is practical for immediate notice by certified mail. Anything less than that might assume that staff has access to phone numbers or emails of all residents. The one thing we certainly have access to is a mailing address for the property owner. The next item is the fee requirement for landmark designations. This is particularly when the owner does not consent. In both the existing and proposed draft, there's no fee when the application is filed by the property owner with the property owner's consent. The existing ordinances says the applicants, other than the owner, shall bear all costs and pay all fees in connection with an application, and that fees will be established by the city council. Those fees were never clearly established by the city council, and the language of bearing all costs and paying all fees leaves the door pretty wide open for what they may be. So the proposed draft elaborates on what type of costs the applicant might be responsible for, such as public notice for a public hearing, minutes taken at the public hearing, transcription of minutes at the public hearing, attorney fees, staff time, etc. At this time, staff is recommending a $1,000 deposit at the time of application to cover such costs. In the event that the deposit is depleted, it would need to be replenished in order for the application to continue. That requirement is very similar to what we require for Plan Commission applications. We did a study a few years ago that determined about the average cost of a public hearing is $500, and the minimum time involved from a staff review level is about $500. The concerns regarding fees is that the property owner should not have to incur legal fees or direct expenses if they wish to challenge a nomination. The owner should also not incur additional construction or renovation costs resulting from any delays from a nomination. Looking at the rationale for the recommendation, again, the fees are waived if the owner consent is obtained. Otherwise, the applicant is required to pay to protect a community resource. So they have to put some money up front for their interest. All permitted work as proposed in the draft, that's all work that's already had a building permit issued, would be allowed to continue after an application has been filed. So there should not be any construction or renovation costs or delays from a nomination. It kind of leads directly into the next point. The existing ordinance requires that all work must stop once an application for a landmark or a district has been submitted. The draft ordinance would allow all previously permitted work to continue. Only work that has not been issued a building permit would need to be suspended upon the filing of an application. I think the concerns there were pretty obvious. The owner has invested time and money in preparing construction plans and should not have to lose on that investment because of somebody else's interest to designate their property, and staff believes that the proposed ordinance addresses that concern. Leads to kind of the final main topic of public discussion, neighborhood conservation districts. The first question we've been asked is why this is being added to the ordinance. And the answer is, in the early 2000s, the city was considering establishing the northwest edition of Geneva as a historic district, and that's reflected in our comprehensive plan. The area was studied in 2002, and it was determined that there's too many structures that had been covered in synthetic siding and therefore would not meet the requirements of a National Register district. And at that time, a recommendation was made to the city that they consider establishing it as a neighborhood conservation district, but in the existing ordinance, we don't have a provision to do so. So we're introducing that tool in this new draft. The definition of a neighborhood conservation district is any area of the city defined by specific geographic boundaries that shares related properties with similar patterns of development, architecture, and/or period of significance, and they may not meet the standards for designation as a historic district, but is threatened with obsolescence or deterioration unless protected. And the important part of that definition is that a neighborhood conservation district is not the same as a historic district. It's only required to be 30 years old in whole or in part instead of 50 years old. It does not need to include historic landmarks on the National Register, but it does need to possess a reasonable, not necessarily pristine integrity of scale, design, materials, and workmanship. It needs to possess a recognizable neighborhood identity, development pattern, or character that's worthy and in need of protection. And that's really the reason to establish a neighborhood conservation district. A conservation district can assist in stabilizing an area. They may be declining, or they may not meet the criteria for a historic district due to synthetic siding or other past alterations. It can assist an area that's subject to intense redevelopment pressure that may not be welcomed by a neighborhood, but is not protected otherwise by a historic district. It can also assist individual residents and their neighbors who would like to be in a historic district and would like to work towards rehabilitation through the tools provided in a neighborhood conservation district. A neighborhood conservation district also affords city staff an opportunity to interface with neighborhood residents to encourage preservation of the character-defining elements of their property and neighborhood without requiring the strict preservation of individual elements. It also discourages unnecessary teardown and inappropriate additions of new construction, but without the lengthy design review process required by the historic district. A neighborhood conservation district does not require the same level of review as a historic district. Staff would review everything in a conservation district, including demolitions and new construction. A neighborhood conservation district is also not held to the same standards as a historic district. Language such as shall not be destroyed is replaced with shall be retained, if technically feasible and economically practicable. This allows staff to educate applicants when they come in for their permit on what might be more appropriate or in keeping with the original design, but does not require it if it's not affordable or feasible. New elements and materials are allowed and are not required to duplicate or replicate historic features as they are in the historic district. Again, this gives staff an opportunity to educate, but not to require such replacements. It should be stressed that new materials are allowed, and staff has the opportunity to educate the owner on how those new materials can be added without damaging the character defining elements of the property. So moving on to the concerns and rationale on conservation districts, the concerns we've heard is that they're an unnecessary layer of control that will add more review time and more costs to more properties in Geneva. There is no need to protect properties that do not qualify for historic district designation. And again, this is kind of reiterating the points in the introduction to this topic, but the rationale for the recommendation is they can assist in stabilizing areas. They can assist in an area that's subject to intense and unwelcomed redevelopment pressure. They can assist residents that would like to work towards historic district designation. Also important to note that this is a tool that's being added to the preservation toolbox. There are no districts that are being proposed at this time. And neighborhood conservation districts really are an opportunity for education on the values of preservation in the community. The Illinois Historic Preservation Agency views the addition of this section on conservation districts as positive, as it allows for more flexibility in local preservation efforts. That's really the conclusion of staff's brief overview of the changes to the ordinance. These, again, are what we've identified as the key items of public discussion, and Michael and I are both available for any questions as the night goes on.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you prefer this light to remain off? Or would you like to remain off? Okay. That slide will remain up since this is really the crux, I think, of the discussion this evening. Before we continue on, I would like to ask the Committee of the Whole's indulgence to accept for the record the following documents that have been submitted to my office that all of you have received as well, but some in the audience and some tuning in at home might not be aware. I'm going to cite these documents, and I'll ask for just a motion to accept and put into the official record. Number one is a 2011 citizen petition in support of the inclusion of owner consent in the City of Geneva's Historic Preservation Codes, 10-6-4 and 10-6-5. 34 property owners and other City of Geneva citizens supported the petition, which reads, I support Geneva's current historic district. I also support changing city codes to require property owner consent for designation of additional historic districts or additional historic properties. A 2011 citizen petition in opposition of the formation of historic district designation. 66 property owners and other City of Geneva citizens supported the petition, which read, the residents of the proposed South Geneva study area oppose the formation of the historical district designation. We ask the City Council to stop any future action that may lead to, now or in the future, any such designation. Correspondence from Mr. Marty Smirsich, which states, in part, the petition supporting owner consent, signed by 200 concerned citizens of Geneva, that we started in 2011 and was halted permanently after the mayor promised to review the subject. The signatures were collected in 2011 and are now being presented for inclusion in the current review. The 2011 petition opposing formation of the historic district in the South Geneva study area. Another letter from Mr. Marty Smirsich, dated October 2014, 51 additional signatures to be added to the 200 signatures previously submitted, for a grand total of 251 property owners and other City of Geneva citizens supporting the petition, which reads, "I support changing City Codes 10-6-4 and 10-6-5 as they pertain to areas outside the current downtown historic district." A copy of the national and state ordinance requirements dated 7/2014. This was submitted by, I believe, Mr. Smirsich. Tax benefits and incentives document. Oh, excuse me, these are submitted by,
He just said no, it wasn't him.
were these submitted by,
Geneva Citizens for the Protection of Property.
Geneva Citizens for the Protection of Property, excuse me. This one titled Tax Benefits and Incentives, Impact of Preservation on Property Values, Owner Consent Stymied. Again, we've all received these, and this will be a part of the official record, and when the minutes of this meeting are published, these will all be included. A letter dated the 26th of May, today, from the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency. The Illinois Historic Preservation Agency is providing the attached letter for your meeting today regarding the Geneva Historic Preservation Ordinance. In essence, they are in support of the ordinance as presented. A copy of this letter will be included in the record without objection. And lastly, May 22nd of 2015, a letter addressed to me and the City Council from Landmarks, Illinois, regarding the support of the proposed ordinance as it currently exists. So without objection, I'll enter those into the record, and they will forever be attached to the meeting minutes. Let's take a 10-minute break. I'm exhausted. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, if I have the sign-up sheet, I will begin to call out names of folks who would like to speak. Again, we remind you to please join us at the podium. Please be mindful that you are being televised live. The microphone is there for your convenience and ours. We ask that you speak clearly, slowly, loudly, state your name, spell your last name, provide your address, and the floor is yours. All right. Okay, we have lots of scratch-offs. That's awesome. First up, Mr. William Rosenfelder. Mr. Rosenfelder, have you left us this evening? How about Kevin Doherty? Mr. Kevin Doherty. Welcome, sir. Please join us at the podium. The floor is yours, sir.
That's the second list. It's not the first.
Doesn't matter. We're winging it, Mark. This is like cards in Vegas, man. We're just going to shuffle this up.
So my name is Kevin Doherty, D-O-H-E-R-T-Y. I live in a historic district, 311 South First Street. The house that I lived in, I've been living in since 1999. 3 years ago in July, we had a house fire, which gutted the whole house. So I know about living in a historic home, right? I knew going in what it meant to live in a historic home. So I may complain about some of the restrictions on me, but I knew it going in. What I feel would be very unfair is for people who do not know the restrictions of having to deal with the Historic Society and the things you can do and cannot do. Then you purchase your asset, your home, you know, this has your value, and then get told, right, that you can no longer freewheel any kind of changes to your house structurally, color, right, siding, windows, right? That's not something that I would sign up for, right? I have less to grieve about because I knew it going in. But if I was told that I bought a home that was not historic, and then it was historic, and I had all these restrictions around me, I would not be in favor of that. So does anybody here live in a historic home on the panel?
Used to.
No one? So none of you have gone through? Okay, so you've gone through some of the, issues of having to get approval to change your toilet paper from red to white, or, right?
You know what, let's not have the conversation.
No, I just want to, so it is very arduous to make
is.
any kind of changes to your home, and how can we apply that to somebody who took their hard-earned money to buy a house, and that this is my house? It's not the City of Geneva's, it's not the state, or CIG, whatever you refer to that acronym, right? So I think it's very difficult to put that on somebody. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I know. Oh, you know what? Wow, this is great. Nicole Willing, 1202 James Street. Welcome, Miss Willing.
Hi, thank you. So Nicole Willing, W-I-L-L-I-N-G, 1202 James Street. I actually would just echo the previous comments and say the same. I recently purchased my home at 1202 James, knowing that it was not part of the historic district, and had looked at homes inside of the historic district and outside, and had purposely bought outside for some various reasons aforementioned. So I would also agree and concur and ask the aldermen in the city to really think about that for homeowners who have purchased outside of the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's pretend this is the Geneva High School graduation and save all applause till the end. Good Lord. We'll have to edit the tape like Nixon did and take out the 17 minutes. How about Adam Gibbons? Mr. Gibbons? Mr. Gibbons?
Sort of the last one to sign in, but.
I know, this is exciting. That's why we're penalizing you by going third.
Adam Gibbons, 33 West 777 Hill Road, Geneva.
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, the first two comments, in my view, didn't have exactly much to do with the proposed ordinance changes. I think they look great, would encourage everyone to vote in favor of them. They've been well thought out. It's a nice compromise. And, I've been a citizen of this area since 2006. I love the historic district. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. As the applause dies down slightly. Pardon me? How about Mrs. Russell at 1221 Caneville Road? Mary Russell? Welcome.
My name is Mary Russell. It's Russell, and I live at 1221 Caneville Road in Geneva. I just moved here about a year ago, and I love the town. And I just wanted to say that we previously lived in Naperville for 10 years and saw, some of the tear down, a lot of the tear downs and building there. And I would hate to see that happen in Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you. How about Mr. Roth, Gordon Roth? Pass. Pass. Whoa. Thank you, sir. How about Nanette Anderson? Mrs. Anderson?
Nanette Anderson. I am at 521 West Lane in Geneva, Andersson. I believe you all received a letter that I sent to you regarding the historic preservation changes to the ordinance. I'm not going to reiterate that, but I do want to say publicly my support of this ordinance. I sit on the Historic Preservation Commission, and I am the assistant chair. Okay, couldn't remember the title exactly, but this was a long process. It took us a long time to get to it, and there was a lot of compromise involved. It's a good ordinance. I urge you to accept it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. I'm going to take a shot at this, folks. It's Mr. and Mrs. W.G. Nicholson? This is like the show Password. What was that show? It was like, how about, let's see, Christine Bordage. Miss Bordage. Good evening. No passing from Bordage.
Passing. Christine Bordage, 40 South Lincoln. Geneva is an incredible town, and it's had an almost 150-year history of maintaining its original charm and beauty. and there are currently 730 structures governed by the HPC in as few as 20 of those years. So for 130 years, these structures were voluntarily preserved. With such a long history of voluntary preservation, why is owner consent such a frightening concept to some? The best way to extinguish this fear is for those concerned to purchase those properties they wish to preserve. The proposed ordinance as written does not prevent another Sunset Road debacle from happening. It may be more costly for a non-owner to apply for landmark status to a non-consenting owner's home, but it doesn't prevent it. Why should a homeowner have to incur legal fees to protect their property when the whole situation could be avoided with the addition of two simple words, owner consent? The National Register of Historic Places requires owner consent. The Illinois Historic Preservation Agency allows owner consent for certified local governments. In a sampling of over half of the 79 CLGs in Illinois, more than 75% require owner consent on either single property landmarking and/or multiple property districting. Barrington and Glen Ellen have owner consent requirements and maintain very successful preservation programs. With 730 structures and a part-time non-resident preservation planner, the concept of neighborhood conservation districts are a grave concern. The guidelines a homeowner must follow are not clearly defined in the proposed ordinance. The standards to designate a neighborhood conservation district are easily met for almost the entire city of Geneva. Thousands of structures would meet the loose criteria and fall under HPC control. The pride of Geneva and what visitors come to experience is the downtown area. Why does Geneva need neighborhood conservation districts? Where would the resources of time and money come from to fund this ambitious endeavor? Is expanding the authority of the HPC simply for the sake of expansion? What is required of homeowners in these districts? Until these and many other questions are answered, why should this section be included? I live outside the historic district by choice. My neighborhood features many distinct and older homes, as well as some completely renovated homes. The care people have taken to keep those homes maintained and updated has all happened without the watchful eye of the HPC. Why is it needed now? I urge you to vote no to the proposed historic preservation ordinance until owner consent is included and neighborhood conservation districts are removed. Thank you.
Thank you all for heeding the no applause comment. That's great. You need your microphone on first?
Can I ask for?
Ms. Borzoi.
Yeah, because she mentioned something that does require owner consent, and I wasn't sure of what organization you were speaking of.
National Register of Historic Places requires owner consent.
Is that correct, Mr. Lambert? I guess I just would like some clarification. I wouldn't remember which organization, if that's fine.
That is not accurate. The National Register does not require owner consent. What it does allow is an owner to object at the time that the public hearing is held. And if the owner objects, the nomination is still heard. It is then sent to the keeper of the register in Washington, D.C., and the objection is filed with it. And if the keeper of the register believes that the property deserves designation, the property is then recorded with a determination of eligibility. So owner consent is not required for the National Register.
I did not see that on their website.
Well,
I was just asking for clarification.
That's fair. No, that's fair. That's quite all right. Mrs. Liz Safanda. Mrs. Safanda, good evening.
Liz Safanda, 1013 Dunstan Road, S-A-F-A-N-D-A, rhymes with veranda, Safanda. Okay, we need a little note of levity here, don't we? All right, yeah, okay. I think the ordinance is an amazing amount of work and a great improvement over what was existed from 1995. I think that it represents a really major compromise. There were elements of it that I myself thought were too strict, such as the supermajority and the imposition of fees that I was concerned might become excessive and a deterrent. However, I think those protections are warranted, and I hope that you as council members will look at this entire document and give it your vote of approval. Thanks to all of you for your work and for your consideration.
Thank you. Carolyn Jurdy. Mrs. Jurdy? This is the By the Blizzards document. This is the... Yeah, that's right, exactly. Well, we're not going to waive your taxes after all. Thank you for signing up. Sorry about that, madam. How about Mr. Jeff Golden? Mr. Golden, welcome, sir.
Hi, thank you. Good evening. Jeff Golden, Golden. I live at 328 South 5th Street. You know, as you had stated at the beginning, the number one, I think of David's presentation, the number one goal is to recognize, honor, and preserve. Why do we have a historic district if we're not going to do everything to recognize, honor, and preserve it? As residents of Geneva, which we all are, our greatest asset is the historic district. That's our number one asset, and we have to do everything we can in our power to protect that for ourselves and for future Geneva people, residents of Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Larry Geese. Mr. Geese.
Thank you, Mayor.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Larry Geese, Gies, 200 Foxford Lane. And I actually signed up for the Blizzards. I didn't realize, I thought there was a sign-in, but I'm never going to say no to getting a chance to speak, especially to my esteemed alderman and the mayor. So thank you very much, first of all, for all the hard work that has been put in to this potential ordinance. And the historic district is gorgeous. I think what has been done for years in Geneva, it makes me proud to live in Geneva, and I think many other folks who drive through Geneva, shop in Geneva, or visit it for any reason feel the same way. And I'm very proud of driving through the historic district whenever I have visitors in town. And so I commend the work that's been done and the work that's being done. But I do believe that we should think about owner's consent. And I urge aldermen, each and every one of you, and alderwomen, each and every one of you, to consider the risk of having an owner make a decision to their property. And that is a risk, and I'm talking outside of the historic district. We, as owners, may make a mistake in doing something to our property or in some way changing our property. There are a lot of rules in the books. I built a home in Geneva, and I can tell you it's not easy, which is great, because it keeps the wonderful things that we have in Geneva in place. But what worries me about this document, and I do agree a lot of work's been done, but just because a lot of work's been done doesn't make it correct. And I think the risk of taking away this right of an owner to make a decision for his property is greater than the risk of an owner making a mistake with his property. And I've always been a believer that in our country, freedom is really defined by the right to vote and the right to own property. And I think this is one infringement that I'm very much against, even though everyone who's been a part of putting this together truly believes, and I sincerely believe myself, this is for the good of the community. So I don't think anything negative about what's been put together, but I think the risk of a property owner making a mistake is much less than the risk of us as a community forcing things upon people or giving someone in the future, maybe long after we're all gone, the ability to tell us something can happen to our property without our owner's consent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Larry, did you applaud when your son graduated this year? See,
One down, two to go.
despite Mr. Rogers telling you, hold your applause till the end? Was that you that interrupted? I was there, man. It was not you. How about Margaret Egan? Mrs. Egan? Pass. You'll pass as well? Just so you know, I'm making notes next to these. Who's passed, I'll come back to you if you wish to speak later on. Forgive me if I mispronounce this. The name, I believe, is Brian. The last name is, it looks like something from the periodic table.
Spring Street.
On Spring Street? Okay, Brian, what's going on here, man? Oh, Duniak, Brian Duniak. I didn't
have my reading glasses.
Good Lord. I didn't know you were a doctor.
I didn't have my reading glasses.
How you doing, Mr. Nick?
Brian Dunick, D-U-N-I-E-C, 228 Spring Street. I live in a historic house, and I put an addition on about 20 years ago, about 1,500 square feet. My lot is about half an acre, and the addition was necessary. It fits right in with the size of the lot and everything else. If you pass this, I wouldn't have been able to put this addition on. I tried to make the addition look exactly like the rest of the house. You can't tell it's an addition and that. And one of the problems I have is, you're preventing somebody that has a small house, a nice lot, and somebody wants to build a better house on there and tear the building down. Nobody wants tear downs. Excuse me. The poor guy who's going to make the money on it wants to tear down. You're preventing the owner from making money. And I figure, well, you want to pay half of my mortgage, go ahead. But I think the owner should have something to say about what's going to happen to his property.
Mrs. Zinke, Carolyn Zinke. How are you, Mrs. Z?
How are you, Mr. Mayor?
Good.
Okay, my name is Carolyn Zinke. I live at 314 Euclid in Geneva, which is not in the Historic District. I am a member of the HPC. And I'm speaking on behalf of my husband, who was not able to be here tonight. Fred, my husband, says that this is in regards to the proposed newly revised historic preservation ordinance. He believes that the document is an excellent example of a comprehensive and well-thought-out preservation ordinance and urges you to adopt it. He is aware that there is a piece of the ordinance which has aroused some discussion and would like to add a few words for your consideration. By way of background, he was the planner in Oak Park, Illinois for 25 years, where his responsibilities including providing support staff. He provided staff support for the Oak Park Historic Preservation Commission, and in effect, he was the part-time preservation planner there. Oak Park has numerous Frank Lloyd Wright structures as well as the Ernest Hemingway House, and 50% of Oak Park's land is both in the National Register and a local historic district. Their historic preservation ordinance includes the provision for landmarking of a structure with or without owner consent. That provision was never utilized in the time that my husband worked in the village, and he feels that there are very few communities across the United States that have taken that rather drastic step of landmarking a historic property without owner consent. Why then does the provision exist? For the same reason that people have insurance policies for auto, health, and life. You never want to use it, but you're awfully glad to have it if the need arises. Landmarking can be a last desperate step to save a community asset. When all else fails and the owner of an important community structure wants to tear it down and put in a parking lot, that provision gives the city's elected officials, you all, the property to step in, if you so choose, to save that structure for the good of the community. Landmarking without an owner's consent is not a threat to the rights of property owners, but rather it's a protection for the rights of the city and its residents. Thank you for your attention and your interest.
Thank you, Mrs. Zinke. Mr. Mike Simon. Mr. Simon? How you doing, Mike?
Good, thanks.
Good.
Mike Simon, S-I-M-O-N, live at 614 Easton Avenue in Geneva. I'm a business owner and the owner of several commercial buildings in the Historic District. I'm a proud member of Preservation Partners, the recipient of an award from them last year for my rehab of the former Tri-City Garage building on 3rd Street. I've appeared before the Historic Preservation Commission many times over the years in connection with a wide variety of projects, all of which were approved. I understand and appreciate historic preservation and the impact it has on our community. Having said that, I have a few points. The proposed ordinance is drafted so that a property owner's consent is not required in order for their property to be designated as historic. The Historic Preservation Commission explains this tool has only been used once in the past 30 years in the case of Riverbank Labs, so it will virtually never be used in the future. If an owner consent was something that we knew was only going to be used once every 30 years, and then only for structures that are eligible to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places, as Riverbank Labs is, I highly doubt that any of us would be here tonight. But when you're considering legislation that would potentially give every house in Ridgewood, Pepper Valley, Sansoni, east of the river, south of the tracks, and north of 3rd Street, and every house in Geneva as it reaches the age of 50, the same protections that Riverbank Labs has, it's time to say, aren't we killing a fly with a sledgehammer here? Take a step back and consider the real potential consequences of your actions. This legislation needs more study, more tweaks, and more safeguards that will protect the property rights of everyday Geneva homeowners who never think they'll be affected by this, but now can be. People in favor of this proposal claim that the $1,000 fee that will be charged to designate a building as historic without owner's consent will deter people from inappropriately filing for such status for a property that isn't theirs. I disagree. While this may be a deterrent to some, it's a fallacy to think it'll stop frivolous landmarking attempts. Lots of people and organizations wouldn't bat an eye at dropping $1,000 in order to prove a point or settle a political or other score. Do any of you have a constituent who complains constantly and you think to yourself, I wouldn't want to get on their bad side? Well, with this legislation and $1,000, they suddenly wield tremendous power over your ability to install a new door or new window in your house. This proposal will serve as a disincentive to make improvements, which may therefore lead to lower property values. This is because if a property is designated as historic or could be designated historic, an owner may decide against making improvements to deteriorating parts of their house in order to avoid all that's entailed in getting permission for those improvements. Going through the process of submitting a proposal to historic preservation and getting permission can be an ordeal. I've appeared before them numerous times. Preparing for the hearings involved takes a lot of time, and I often incur expenses for the related extra time in architects and contractors. Each time I'm a little bit more prepared. But for the novice, the process itself is very intimidating and cumbersome and potentially expensive. If you need to replace your front door, garage doors, windows, decks, or your home has been designated historic, and the choice is to fill out the application and go through the process, or just wait a few years until you sell the house and let the next guy worry about it, many folks will take the latter option. Related to this proposal will serve as a disincentive to add energy-efficient systems to historic homes. Most of us remember the city's battle against the homeowner in the historic district who wanted to add energy-efficient vinyl-clad windows to his vinyl-clad home. The Historic Preservation Commission and ultimately the city fought the homeowner's ability to make the changes. The HPC wanted him to only be able to replace his old wood frame windows with new wood frame windows, which meant the homeowner would be sacrificing the energy and other benefits of the newer materials that are available today. The city fought this homeowner beginning at the municipal hearings level, then in the lower state court, and then up to the appellate court. The homeowner eventually prevailed in his efforts to improve the quality of his home, but only because he had the time as a retiree, the money, it cost him more than $70,000, and the will to fight this battle. Switching gears for a moment to the creation of a new historic district, the proposed ordinance includes a provision that says that in order to override an HPC recommendation to create a new historic district, 51% of the residents of that district must agree to opt out of it. Although this seems on the surface to be fair, in today's society, getting 51% of residents of anywhere to do anything in an organized way is unrealistic. You all know that getting more than 20% of residents to vote in an election is usually unrealistic, so rounding up 51% to opt out of something they likely don't understand will be next to impossible. I'd suggest instead that 51% of the residents of a proposed district opt in before it's created. That way, you have a true majority of stakeholders who you know want this to happen. Do we really want to be saying that anything more than 50 years old, that is, anything built in 1965 and before, is arguably preferable to anything new? Neighborhoods take on personality as they grow older. I've watched every neighborhood in Geneva change for the better as each succeeding generation of home buyers makes their own improvements to their homes. And a mix of older and newer homes in a neighborhood is not inherently a bad thing. I live in a largely historic neighborhood where there have been some tear-downs, and though the new homes sometimes look out of place when first built, within a few years, once landscaping takes hold, most of them fit right in. Conversely, there are some older homes that make me say, how did that ever get built? But that's my personal taste, and it's a slippery slope if what's done ends up being legislation on personal taste by saying that what is old is inherently better than what might replace it. This proposal was drafted, as it should have been, by the Historic Preservation Commission. These 7 people serve the role they do because they're passionate about historic preservation. But do these 7 people represent the views of the majority of Genevans? For if they don't, they, and now you, are about to make a decision that can affect the lives and the primary investments of most of your constituents and fellow citizens. This is a giant decision and one that should include ideas from more than the 7 people that are dedicated to historic preservation. If this is to be enacted, then in my opinion, it should be done after a referendum approved by the voters, rather than the way it's being presented. Finally, despite the fact that you have a room full tonight, most Genevans have no idea this proposal is happening, and they deserve a voice. I can guarantee that many of the folks watching this meeting on TV are saying, how come I didn't know about this? I have an opinion. Virtually every Genevan can be affected by this, and every Geneva taxpayer should have a voice in this decision. A decision by you will impact more Genevans than anything this council has dealt with any time in the past decade. It will impact how neighbors deal with each other, how citizens interact with city officials and advisory boards, and how Geneva is perceived as a community by those considering moving here. The consequences of this vote will be far-reaching and should not be made quickly and without first making certain the entire community is aware of and approves of the implications. Thank you.
Do I dare ask again to refrain from the applause for just,
I think the applause shows where the biggest support is.
well, we'll just suspend the meeting until you can behave. How's that?
Whatever you want to do, then do it. Great.
That'd be great. Okay, everybody take a deep breath, deep breaths. Mr. Simon, thank you very much. Let's refrain from applause, folks. It only delays everything. We're trying to get through this tonight. Let's all behave ourselves as we asked you to do earlier. How about our dear friend, Mr. Carl Safanda?
Just say one thing. My name is Carl Safanda, S-A-F-A-N-D-A. I live at 1013 Dunson Road in Geneva. I've experienced all the tear downs. I've heard all this stuff. People with opinions who've torn down multiple structures. I thought the world would end either by fire or ice. But tonight I have learned that if you approve this amended ordinance, the world will end. Absolutely preposterous.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Sharice Wheeler. Mrs. Wheeler, good to see you.
I'm Sheriff Wheeler, 256 Kenston Court. The document that's presented is anything but trivial or flippant. It is beautifully created with just intense hard work to cover every citizen in this community, to protect us in the very best ways. I know, Mr. Maladra, you asked for facts. Fact number 1, a significant building, when it is destroyed, is gone forever. We all have known loss. The loss of an important building to Geneva is crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Wheeler. Sandy Ellis. Mrs. Ellis?
I'm running out my seat, if anybody wants to.
You could probably auction that off and make some...
Is this on? It's been very difficult for me to hear. Is this better? Okay,
Thank you very much.
all right. Before I start, I would like to make one correction, and that is, we just looked up the National Registration of Historic Places, your question, Mr. Marks, and it does definitely say a property will not be listed if for individual properties the owner objects, or for districts, a majority of property owners objects, and that's direct from the website. Let me first state that everyone in this room loves the charm of Geneva and certainly isn't against preservation, but many don't want forced preservation. Paragraphs have been shuffled in this document, yes, 2 years' worth of work. Words inserted to clarify, changes made, but the revision still contains the controversial clauses that allow a home or a neighborhood to be designated historically without the owner's consent. The request by the City Council for the Preservation Planner and the HPC to review the 20-year ordinance was triggered because of two issues related to the owner's consent issue. We know about the first one. It was mentioned tonight, I believe by Maria Burns, in 2011, where homeowners petitioned that this be looked at closely. They weren't happy with a historic district being designated without their consent. The second issue was on Sunset Road in 2014, where a non-owner applicant didn't want a nearby home demolished and applied to have it landmarked so it could be preserved because the code allowed that. As a result, the property owner incurred legal fees and other costs to prevent this designation. The home was not in a historic district. These two issues were a priority when the City Council requested a review of the code. Strangely, Mayor Burns requested the preservation planner not to meet with citizens during the rewrite process. I know you had your reasons for that in a letter. So the planner was able to cull information from national and state preservation groups, local municipalities, but not meeting with the citizens. When I came before the HPC committee this April in their third meeting, they told me they weren't aware of the multiple signatures on the petitions that had been signed in 2011. Coming close here. An applicant who is not an owner still is not responsible for the homeowner's legal fees to defend his rights, as well as any additional costs. Now, but if there's a change made, the applicant will be required to pay the costs incurred by the city. Being in the historic district has not brought the additional incentives that are being dangled. We hear that homes appreciate more in a historic district. I live in a historic district. My home, 15-year-old home, has depreciated 25% since 2009. It's not more valuable being in the historic district. It might be more valuable being near Starbucks. But my taxes have increased in those 5 years. What about we hear about these tax incentives to help remodeling costs on older homes if you're in a historic district. Well, be prepared to spend at least 25% of the value of your original structure, not including the addition. The reward is that your taxes aren't frozen, it's your assessment. That wouldn't have really helped very much in the last 5 years, would it? To have that assessment frozen. It would not have really reduced the taxes. We've had very little recent documentation in this state that's been presented about these incentives. To my knowledge, there have been no studies in Geneva indicating the home values appreciate more in historic districts, and of the over 700 homes that could have an assessment freeze, a handful have applied and received it. My point is, these incentives are not justification to allow designation of a home or a neighborhood for historic purposes against the owner's wishes. Property rights are sacrificed when preservation is forced upon an owner or a neighborhood. Forcing preservation results in community angst, not community goodwill. Please remove the thorns from this ordinance once and for all. Enough energy has been spent by staff and residents. There's strong support. I didn't hear Mary Burns. I don't know whether it was a mistake or not, but I thought you were going to give a tally of the amount of postcards and correspondence you've received.
That's coming, yes.
Oh, okay,
In fact,
good.
several council members have letters that they've been asked to
Okay.
read into the record as well.
Good.
I will also reference the several hundred postcards and others that I've received in addition to other commentary.
That's going to be tonight, or is that?
Yes, it will be.
Okay, good, okay. And so we do have strong consent that owner consent be required for landmark designations, and that 51% of consenting homeowners decide if they want to be in a historic or a conservation district. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Mayor,
Oh, hold on, handsome.
I'd like a procedural question.
Fire away. What's the question? You have to ask the question before I can grant the procedural.
Okay, it's a
Come to the microphone, please, Hans.
The authority
Come to the, Hans, you have to come to the microphone, my friend.
My name is Hans Heimann, Heymann.
What's the
I'm living.
procedural question to the chair?
What?
You had a procedural question you wanted to ask me?
Yes,
Yes, sir. What is that?
about the authority of a mayor to prohibit the applause or the response of the citizens to the presentation.
Well, guess what, Hans, you're out of order, so thank you very much, and you did not sign up to speak. I've considered your request. Please be seated. We'll consider you later on. Thank you very much. Mr. Steve Kelly. Mr. Kelly. Will pass. Thank you, sir. How about Margaret and Howard, is it Johnston? And Richard Street? Welcome.
I'm Margaret Johnston. I live at 102 Richard Street.
Welcome.
Thank you. This may be going in a slightly different direction, but we live directly across from where Cetron used to stand. And is it correct that Cetron's former property would be included in the Neighborhood Conservation District?
You're asking me?
I'm asking anybody who should know that
We're
kind
gonna
of
look that
thing.
up real quick. It's
Okay.
not the subject, you're right, it's not the subject of tonight's discussion.
No, but I'm wondering how a conservation district such as this might impact future plans for that property development.
Your microphone, David?
The Cetron property was included in the 2002 study. It was identified then as a contributing building to what would have been the district.
So the vacant property would be part of that.
However, to clarify, there is no proposal for a neighborhood conservation district. That was a study that was done in 2002 and has not gone anywhere. So there is no neighborhood conservation district on the table at this point.
Correct.
Oh, okay. So that's just an hypothesis?
It was a study that was completed in 2002 and a recommendation to establish a neighborhood conservation district at that time.
Okay.
We haven't had the tool in the ordinance to be able to do that.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
But
Yes.
But a large chunk of vacant land like that, should it be part of a neighborhood conservation district, does that impact in any way what might be established on that big chunk of vacant land?
Boy, my gut tells me that would be a debate and discussion for another night.
Okay.
It's a great question. David, do you want to provide some
I
insight?
think if we were to draw the boundaries of the study area today with the building being gone, we would not include that vacant property in the study area.
It'd just be, okay. All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to give this a shot, folks. It's 315 South, I believe it's 5th Street. Is it?
Pass.
Thank you. Just out of curiosity, how is that pronounced, since I can't read it?
Danelle.
It is Danelle, okay, got it. That's what I almost said, so. Pass, Danelle, thank you very much. How about, let's see, Mr. Marty Smirsich? That's a new name. I've never heard that one before. How are you, Marty?
I'm good, thank you.
Good to see you, sir.
Nice to see you. We got to quit meeting like this, Mr. Mayor.
No kidding, man.
And I thank you for this opportunity
Thank
to
you.
address this council, and I'm glad that both sides are going to have an opportunity to be heard tonight.
Can everyone hear okay?
Now, the mic is on, right?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, let me again say thank you for the opportunity for both sides to be heard tonight. It's been a long time coming, and it's greatly appreciated. Owner consent is the subject, as a subject, has been defined as the act and result of reaching consensus and agreement through reason and deliberation by owners. As a standalone statement, one would think that that definition must have come from the writings of Thomas Jefferson. He wrote in 1816, "The true foundation of a republican government is the equal right of every citizen in his person and his property and the management thereof." I understand that in today's environment, in 200 years later, we have a much more complex society than we had then. And our personal property rights have changed. Our rights in general have been changed. And we hope that it's for the better. Individual passion for property rights in the city of Geneva, that hasn't changed. You can see it in this room. You can see it in the 200-plus postcards that you received, the 350 signatures that you received that said, by God, we want our rights retained for our properties. And it's interesting to note, Mr. Mayor, when you read those petitions, they all started out with, "I support downtown Geneva." And anybody that doesn't ought to be strung up. It makes so much sense. It's done so much good for this city. And when you hear people like Michael Simon make the statements he made tonight, you can separate downtown Geneva from what is proposed in this code. It's very, very different. The definition I started out with, owner consent, the act of result or result of reaching consensus through agreement, through reason and deliberation. Where did I get that language? I got it out of this code. It's a definition given at the beginning of this proposed code. It's included in the code only to be eroded in statement after statement as you go through the devil's details of the code. The group that was referred to by a previous speaker and by the mayor of 200 in 2011, a very small group. It started out with, well, 1 or 2, and it ended up with 66 signatures, and that grew. And today we have 350 signatures that oppose not including owner consent. When the HPC designed, proposed this code, which includes their authority, incidentally, to administer the approval of their own regulations, hundreds of additional citizens rose up and said, "Hey, this isn't right. What makes you think that you can take my property rights?" It is reasonable to statistically project that the number of Geneva residents who oppose the erosion of our rights will continue to grow quickly incrementally in the coming weeks, months, or years. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg of those who would stand up to protect their property rights. Erosion of property rights is indeed a slippery slope, and to allow designation without owner consent is not excused because other cities have done it, when thousands of cities have not done it, when literally thousands of cities in the state of Illinois have not initiated ordinances that say, we will take your property rights and we will make the decision for you. the proposed code suggests that in order to stop preservation designations, owners must dissent. Now, I must say that the word dissent was taken out from the earlier proposal, but it means the same thing. It means that you have to gather up those that object and strongly object and have them come together and tell the city, hey, you're doing something that we object to. To me, it's akin to proving your innocence rather than the government proving your guilt. That is the slippery slope. What do you think Thomas Jefferson would say today if you put the question to him? I'd like to hear it. There's a tremendous opportunity here for this council to take back the leadership on this subject. You will be applauded for it, Mr. Mayor, in this room and by the hundreds of people that I hope are watching on TV. So I say to you, direct that owner consent be included in the preservation code. I say to you, do not support a plan to provide conservation districts to be established in neighborhoods throughout the city. Mr. Simon listed off those neighborhoods. Do not support a plan or a code that will demand an increase in staff. You have a part-time preservation planner. If this code goes through and is activated, and you do indeed follow the preservation plan that's listed on the website of the city, you can't do it with one half-time employee. You're going to increase staff and spend our money today. Take back the leadership on that for sure. Do not support two home districts or non-continuous properties to form a district. That's simply a backdoor to get at individual landmarking. And I would say, do advance preservation through education, reason, and agreement. It's not been tried. You haven't invested the money. You haven't spent anything on telling me what I should do with my house. There's 50 houses listed on your historic resource list. I can't find any evidence that there has been communication from the city to these people. If there has been, well, there has been, it's been from me. But if there's been any from the city, it's missed my house and it's missed a number of people that are in this room. So invest in that education and do it from a positive standpoint. Do something for the citizens of Geneva. Don't do something to them. If you believe in reason and agreement, do not continue to fund forest preservation. It's counterproductive to the interests of the city. There are a couple of other points. I was going to ask you to put up slide 16 so I could go through the 20 or 30 points, and in the interest of time, I won't do that. But
I'm happy to do so, sir, if that's what your request is.
I don't think it'd be productive at this time, because I had hoped that the issue, the core issue, the elephant in the room, would have been addressed first by this body in a proper decision-making process, and that is owner consent. But instead, we looked at all the detail. So I will...
Ms. Mercic, as you and I have discussed numerous times, these are really the core issues based on the hundreds of emails I've received, the hundreds of phone calls, the postcards, what have you. You have yet to hear from the committee of the whole as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the core issue is owner consent. I mean, if we had owner consent, do you think we'd be standing here talking about all these other issues? I don't think so. Let me address one thing, and that is fees. Somebody suggested a $1,000 fee. The estimate given by members of the city staff at the meeting with the Sunset Road debacle, the applicant, was approximately $1,500. So there definitely should not be a cap on it, and the language should be expressed a little stronger that they are responsible for all fees. But what about the owner? What about the guy that has invested his time and his money and his energy and his personal property? He's going to have fees. If you want a fair and equitable ordinance, put in there that the applicant will be responsible for posting a bond to reimburse the owner for their expenses. I think maybe we're getting to something that would be a little bit more equitable. There are a couple of other things I guess I mentioned the 51%. I just can't get beyond the idea that you want the cent in your city in order to drive something forward, and that you wouldn't accept education and agreement. Pre-application meeting. There is, and it's pointed out that, hey, we have a pre-application meeting. Isn't that something positive? Who is it with? It's with the applicant. It's not with the owner. And you say, okay, we encourage the applicant to address it with the owner. That just isn't going to happen. Is it so difficult to pick up a telephone and, number one, call the affected alderman and say, hey, we have somebody that wants to apply for an application in your neighborhood, or we have somebody that is interested in applying for an application for your entire district? A telephone call. Yet the city planner is part-time and may not have time to do that. Is it not reasonable, before the application is accepted, to have a pre-meeting with the owner? I mean, you're going to spend the time with the applicant. Where is the fair and equitable process here? Why don't we spend the same amount of time with the owner of the property? We talk about a public information meeting. This is, as it's written in the code, a very poorly conceived concept. And that concept says, shall not be a forum for the debate or the solicitation of testimony regarding merits of the proposed neighborhood. Well, I was at the meeting in 2011 at the Public Works, and I saw the quality of the presentation that was being made that was called information. It was a hard sell pitch, poorly done, poorly represented, and full of errors. I didn't recognize them all then. I certainly recognize them now. Why in the world would you have an information meeting and not allow the affected parties to participate? That doesn't make sense to me. We worry about outsiders coming into the city and doing things to us. Yet we invite outsiders to come in and apply for designating our properties. Who are these outsiders? Who are these bankers? Who are these developers? Are they the people that have built the city, have helped build it? If we were back in 1928, would the builder of my home have been an outsider? I don't really know if he was a Batavia resident or a Geneva resident, or where he got his money from. And, just because he's a banker doesn't make him evil. And just because he is looking for economic value out of his investment, that doesn't make him evil. Yet we pretend that it is. Public hearing. The code provides for public hearing, and it provides it to be held by the HPC. A public hearing may be continued to a date certain and so forth. In all that language, it does not say that the owner is entitled to a continuance before their public hearing. Public hearing held by the HPC. The HPC wrote the code, they envisioned it, they recommended it. They have the power to enforce it and to approve, and now they're going to hold a public hearing. I was at the HPC meetings. I was at all of them. And I will say publicly that I respect the individuals for their passion for preservation. I do not respect them for their ability to listen to the public and to properly evaluate in an open session, in an open way, the opinions of the public. If you're going to have a public hearing on this subject, I would suggest that you do it before this council. If that isn't good enough, find a suitable arbitrator to conduct that public meeting. And if that isn't enough, how about an elected ombudsman? There are, maybe 5 or 6 other ways of doing it, but don't put us in front of the HPC again to have a public meeting and to be treated in the way that we were. They did their job. Mr. Lambert did his job. And between Mr. Lambert and all of those that he consulted with across the country and across the state and the HPC, you couldn't find a stronger forced preservation code than is before you tonight. In closing, the historic preservation can coexist with owner consent. All it takes is the will of this council and some leadership to do what's right and to do it for the citizens. Don't do something to the citizens. Anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask about my statements?
None. However, I do have a couple clarifications. I think Mrs. Ellis may have brought it up as well. There was a reference made to the fact that professional staff are not allowed to meet with either proponents or opponents of a proposed new ordinance. That is, in fact, partially true. The reason why I asked Mr. DeGroot and Mr. Lambert to not entertain countless hours of meetings is because they had work to do. If I allowed, for example, or Mr. Lambert or Mr. DeGroot allowed, or Mrs. McKittrick as a direct supervisor allowed countless meetings to go on, you know darn good and well, we would have all been accused of having more meetings with one side and less with the other. Therefore, let's have us all in the open.
I agree with you.
And you and I have had this discussion before. I just
Yes,
wanted to
we have. We've had a
clarify.
different discussion, Mr. Mayor.
Pardon me?
We've had a different discussion.
We have, yeah.
And that the different discussion was, I do not want to influence the independent thought process of the city planner, or the preservation planner. Now, that made no sense to me. What you just said now makes great sense to me, and I would have countered with that. I would have said, fine, I understand. I don't want to take up hours. Let me submit things in writing, as I did, asking for them to be vetted by the city planner, asking to take advantage of our city employee to answer my questions so I don't stand up and make a fool out of myself by saying something that hasn't been vetted. Give me an opportunity to present that. You didn't do that. You said, I don't want to influence his individual thought process. That's wrong, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, no. In fact, there's an email, and I'll make this email.
Oh, I have it.
Exactly. That's not true, Mr. Smirsich.
What isn't true?
I'm not worried about your influence over 2 professional staff people. I'm not worried about that at all. I'm worried about the perception of influence by allowing Mr. Smirsich to meet with whomever he chooses at your beck and call, but not let, say, for
Okay,
example.
I misread your words.
Fair enough.
Mr. Lambert, were you told not to meet with us?
Mr. Smirsich, you can't ask direct questions of the staff.
Oh, I thought at the beginning of this that you had said that we may ask questions. May I?
You may ask questions, but those questions have to come to the chair. That's Robert's Rules of Order.
Mr. Chair, would you ask Mr. Lambert if he was told
Mr.
not to
Lambert,
meet
were
with
you
you?
told specifically not to meet with Marty Smirsich? And/or, for example, anyone from Historic Preservation Commissions and/or from the Fox Valley Preservation Society or anyone else?
Yes, I was told that I was not to meet with anybody and do my work independently and come back with a recommendation to the HBC.
Mr. Mayor, I don't want to I don't
No,
want
it's all good. I just wanted to clarify. Mrs. Ellis, you have to come to the microphone if you want to speak.
I do not want to.
The answer is yes, he was told not to meet with proponents or opponents of the particular ordinance because it was taken too
Both
much of his time.
sides, both sides, and you
exactly.
specifically said,
sides, right.
including preservation partners.
Absolutely.
And I respect
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Okay, so how do we get into an argument like this in a
I'm
public
not arguing, I'm just
debate?
clarifying, that's all.
Yeah, I know, you're just clarifying.
This is part of the-
Well,
this is-
I would hope,
Marty, you and I have spent more time together than our respective significant others. So you know that. We've had
Oh.
coffee and, oh, holy mother of God.
As
Coffee.
as I said,
This
we've
is
got
part
to,
of the- this
we've
is
got
part
to
of the
quit
fun.
meeting like this, people are beginning to talk.
Anything
But-
else, anything else, Marty, before I call the next speaker?
Yeah, I want to go back to the point, take the leadership and include owner consent. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you. Mr. Mike Foote? Mr. Foote with us this evening?
Yes, I will defer to another homeowner.
Thank you, Mr. Foote. How about Mr. Scott Roy?
Good evening, my name is Scott Roy. I live at 1231 Coster Court, and I am chairman of the Historic Preservation Commission. And I wanted to give all the other homeowners an opportunity to speak, so I just had some brief comments. One of them I wanted to say was the presentation that Mr. DeGroot put together, talked about the existing ordinance and the proposed. We had 5 meetings that went through that process. There were a lot of iterations that happened between that existing ordinance and the proposed ordinance. And most of these issues that we are talking about tonight were dramatically changed from the existing to what we finally got to, and that was because of the input from the community and the people on the commission and the people that talked with us. And I think we did a good job of incorporating, short of no owner or allowing owner consent. I think we went a long way in accommodating what the public was interested in. The second thing that I would say is that we've talked a little bit tonight about the Sunset debacle, and I was not really involved in that, but just heard about it in a cursory way. But that debacle was based upon the existing ordinance and not the proposed. And I think that the money spent or the potential money that was spent and the way the process happened or didn't happen was because we did not have this new ordinance. And so I would say that this new ordinance goes a long way to keep that from happening. And the last thing that I would say is Mr. Smirchis was talking about how the Historic Preservation Commission was railroading and guiding the conversation through these public meetings that we had, and I just take issue with that. I think that we did a good job of listening to what the public had to say. Everyone had a chance to say what they wanted to say. We incorporated some of it, we agreed with some of it, we disagreed with some, and that's what our vote came to last week. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. The following individuals have opted to pass. Gordon Roth. Mr. Roth, would you like to speak now? He went to Dairy Queen. He left, right. How about, I believe it's Nicholson? Mr. and Mrs. Nicholson? Miss Egan? Would you like to speak? No. How about, forgive me for the delay, how about Mrs. Jurdy? She snuck out as well. Let's see, Danella? You okay? How about Mr. Kelly? No. Mr. Foote?
No.
Anyone who has not yet signed up who wishes to ask a question, provide this gentleman in the back row, or ante-penultimate row? How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
My name's Paul Zomer.
You gotta wait till you get to the microphone, Paul.
Paul Zomer, I'm at 418 South 6th Street. It's Zellmer.
Welcome, Paul.
I'm actually a member of the Historic Preservation Commission also, and I am the lone dissenter on that board. I did not vote for the Historic Preservation Ordinance, and it was specifically concerning owner consent and the groundswell of support that I saw from the emails that I received from your office, Mayor. And I went and spoke to a number of people that were within, that were part of those emails, and they stated that they were very lucid in their understanding of what the ordinance was and what it was supposed to do. And they were also very, they understood what it was and what it was supposed to do and the benefits of it and the actual, the detractions of it. And I don't believe that non-owner consent should be the final tool in that toolbox of it. And that was my reasoning for not voting for the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zillmer. Anyone else who has not yet, spoken, who wishes to speak? Yes, sir. Please join us. You have to join us at the podium? Oh, my God, this is my high school classmate, Mike Muller, who I grew up with. How are you, Mike?
I'm very good, Kevin. How are you?
See you, man.
You too. Thank you. I just wanted to say,
Mike, can you share your address real quick?
yes, I live at 1040 James Street in Geneva. Before that, I lived at 911 James Street. So, who knows where I'll be next. In general, I just wanted to say that Geneva homeowners generally do it right and improve their properties on their own in a way that folks can be proud of. I've seen it on my own street. The proposed changes that we see tonight are a result of hard work by both sides of the issue. And so the document as it stands is getting closer to something we can all be proud of. Let's continue to work on it, and so vote no as it stands tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Good to see you. Anyone else who has not yet spoken who wishes to speak? Oh, yes, sir. One of the great authors of our time. Good to see you, man.
John Lakaitis, 728 Richard Street. My last name is spelled Laukaitis.
Thank you, John.
And I am a historian. I enjoy history, but also I am a owner of a house, which is not in the historic area. And I live in an area which I would say are mostly modest homes, north near Gray Street. Homes which have teachers, nurses, mechanics, rental homes. And my concern with the Conservation District and words like homeowners will be discouraged is those particularly vague words can become cumbersome and burdensome to people who want to do modest and affordable improvements to their house. People who do not live in $500,000 homes or $700,000 homes, but homes more in the $150,000 to $200,000 to $250,000 range. So to replace windows, people are going to look for vinyl because that's what they could afford. And when there's a draft in the house, they're more concerned about keeping the integrity of the house as inhabitable than as historic. So while I choose, as an individual property owner, to maintain my house in a historic way, I think to be equitable to all those different demographics that live in Geneva, you really have to consider what the conservation area might include and the affordability of some of the improvements if they have to be approved by the Historic Commission, and whether or not people will make those improvements or just let the house continue to go without them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lakaitis. Anyone else who has not yet spoken? My good friend, Hans, welcome, sir.
My name is Hans Heimann, and I am on 107 Batavia Avenue. The only thing I have learned in my reasonably long life, that the story that you worked on it very hard is not an excuse for accepting something which is questionable. And I would suggest that you go back to the drawing board and take into consideration the comments you heard today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Do you want me to turn it? There's been a request for a, for a 5-minute recess. Does anyone object if we take just a quick break here? 3 minutes, be back in 7? Ladies and gentlemen, the cameras are rolling again, the microphones are back on. This meeting is reconvened. We will begin by recognizing our Community Development Director, Mr. David DeGroot, and our planner, Mr. Michael Lambert, to address some of the issues that were raised. Then we will turn it over to our members of the Committee of the Whole. So we have just a, should we? Mr. DeGroot? Yes, Mr. Bruno?
I know several of us, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Several of us had public comment to read into from constituents. Should that?
When you have your chance, that's when we'll do so, yeah.
Or lean forward.
Okay, Director of Community Development, Mr. DeGroot.
I think Mr. Lambert was actually going to begin.
Oh, okay, Mr. Lambert.
Okay, just to correct a few things that were said this evening that, before we go further, I would just like to clarify a few points here. The first one is that it has been stated that the Historic Preservation Commission regulates color. I want to be very clear that we do not regulate color here in Geneva. While some commissions do regulate color, we do not.
I would like to contest that, because I had to check, get approval on any color changes in my home.
I will tell you that in the ordinance from 1995, it does say color, but the policy has been since long before I got here that color is not regulated, and we have not regulated since I've been here since 2013.
So
we do not discuss.
One thing, your policy is another?
The ordinance, one of the things that we are doing with the new ordinance is trying to correct or trying to address policy that's been adopted by the Historic Preservation Commission that's not reflected in the 1995 ordinance. And all I can tell you, I cannot speak for the previous people who've held my position, but since I came here in 2013, I have been directed and we have been consistent that we do not regulate color. We do not discuss color at the Historic Preservation Commission.
Is it fair to state that the new ordinance doesn't even address nor touch color?
Correct.
Okay.
My personal experience was different from that,
Well,
for the record.
thank you. We apologize for that. But the color is lovely, by the way, because I've seen it. Yes, Mr. Lambert.
Continuing, I would just like to clarify again, not to beat a dead horse or a dying horse, but to clarify again about the National Register. The National Register does not require owner consent. The National Register process has a public meeting in which the nominations are reviewed. The property that's affected must be notified not less than 30 days before that hearing is held and not more than 75 days before that hearing is held. At that time, an owner can file a letter of objection. If an owner files a letter of objection, the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council continues reviewing the nomination and makes a recommendation. If the recommendation is considered favorable, it goes on to the keeper of the register at Washington, D.C. At that point, the keeper of the register determines whether or not the application has merit and recognizes if there is a letter of objection filed. And so at that point, if a letter of objection is filed, the property is not listed in the National Register, but it's got a determination of eligibility with the National Park Service. And that determination of eligibility gives the ability to access some of the same programs or to be converted to an actual list on the National Register by the same or future owners at some point down the road. So that is the process with the National Register.
Just to clarify, Mr. Lambert, does the National Register of Historic Places require owner consent?
No.
Okay.
It recognizes owner objection.
Is the website wrong?
I don't know what site you're sourcing, so. Well, again, I don't know unless I'm sitting next to you and looking at it, but, I mean, we'll clarify that, though, for the record, absolutely. Yeah, so.
I will tell you, I did serve on the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council, and I do know that how owner objection is dealt with at the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council. see, the next point, it's been also identified, it's the phrase has been used that a sampling of certified local governments show that 75% require owner consent. I am not sure how the sampling was made. In looking at the 79 communities that are certified local governments in Illinois, a list that was provided to me by Landmarks Illinois, the most recent comprehensive survey of those communities was done in 2013. 26% of those 79 communities required owner consent. So I'm not sure where the 75% number is coming from, but that is not the information that's coming from the statewide advocacy group. It has been stated several times this evening, and just to clarify the record, it's been stated several times this evening that we are, or suggested that we're imposing a new provision in this ordinance of not requiring owner consent. However, I want to remind everybody that's been a staple of the ordinance since 1982 when it was first adopted in Geneva. So not requiring owner consent has been in Geneva for more than 30 years. And that is not a new restriction or new part being added into the ordinance. That's something that has existed since the first ordinance was adopted in Geneva in 1982. Also, it was stated that with being in a historic district, and it was then extrapolated to a neighborhood conservation district, that tear-downs would not be allowed. And I think it's important to note that since 1997, there have been 60 demolitions within the historic district here in Geneva. So certainly demolitions are allowed, and I believe there's been 19 in the last just in the last 5 years in the historic district. It was also suggested in several pieces of testimony that because we have a 50-year requirement for designation of a property, that it was suggested that once a property is 50 years old, it is subject to being designated as historic. And that is not the case. The case is that once it's 50 years old, it's eligible to be considered for designation, but it also has to meet certain levels of qualifications and certain standards for designation. And one of the issues that we've talked about internally, I've talked about with the Historic Preservation Commission and others, is that one of the questions that's being grappled with in the historic preservation field at large is that after 1965, we are faced with tract development in the United States of America. And there's lively discussion in the historic preservation community as to whether or not tract housing and large subdivisions have historic significance. It's a drastic change in the way America was built after 1965. I also just would like to correct the record that it was suggested that the Historic Preservation Commission or perhaps me as the preservation planner believes that old is better than new. I would like to on record saying that I think that we very carefully evaluate new construction within the historic district, and there have been many times where we have said that an old building, evidenced by the demolitions I've cited before, that sometimes new is better, and we have guidelines in our ordinance to deal with new construction within the historic district. A lot has been said this evening also about whether or not historic district designation provides an increase in value to real estate within the district. I have probably 15 studies here of which 2 of them suggest that historic districts do not add value, but the remaining 12 or 13 would suggest that the value in a historic district compared to comparable homes within the same community, the same demographics, that those homes and those business buildings rise in value anywhere from 5 to 35% above areas that are not designated. The most recent study was just completed, a fairly intense study in 2014 that looked at a 30-year history in historic districts and found that the average was about 22% additional increase in value. Now, that does not reflect downturns in the overall residential or commercial market, as we've experienced the last few years, but historically, designated properties that are of the same building stock that are protected rise in value or maintain their value as opposed to those that are undesignated. One of the problems with those comparisons is you cannot compare a housing study done in New York City with a housing study over time done in a place like Geneva. So you have to look at similar studies with similar housing and building stock. Another issue that has come across my desk and was also stated again tonight is that the provisions of the revised draft ordinance are not new to make it a citywide ordinance. The present ordinance that was adopted in 1995 is a citywide ordinance, and that is also the same going all the way back to the first ordinance in 1982. So this is not a new concept to suggest that places within the municipal boundaries that attain 50 years old and meet certain criteria could be designated as landmarks or as either historic districts or conservation districts. In regarding to the identification of fees, and whether or not $1,000 is appropriate or not, I can't say that I have read every ordinance in Illinois, but I have read a good stack of them, and I have not found any ordinance that is charging $1,000 or more to file an application for a historic landmark or historic district designation. Again, I've not read every single one, so I may have missed one, but the fees charged by the municipalities with historic districts and historic preservation ordinances seems to range between the $250 and $350 range, not the $1,000 range that we're proposing. I think that covers the major issues that I wanted to correct for the record. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. One last shot. Anyone who has not yet spoken wish to speak? Otherwise, we're going to turn this meeting over to the Committee of the Whole members. Members of the Committee of the Whole. Alderman Maladra. And again, just a reminder, nice and loud so everyone can pick you up.
I'm usually quiet. I do have a statement that I've been asked to read in. It's from a constituent of the Fifth Ward who intended to be here this evening, but at the last minute could not.
And do you have a copy to present to the recording secretary as well? Or at least forward via email?
I can forward that,
Great.
yes. So it begins, as I'm unable to attend tonight's meeting, I will much appreciate if you would read my comment below in the meeting concerning the reapproval of Geneva's historic preservation ordinance. To the Geneva City Council and those others present, thank you for listening to what I have to say on the matter of approving Geneva's updated historic preservation ordinance. I am Ernie Mahaffey. My wife Sheila Penrose and I live at 503 South First Street, which we've significantly renovated 3 times. We own 405 South First Street, which we renovated to both historic and high-energy standards in 2009. Both our homes listed Both homes are listed properties within the Geneva Downtown Historic District and have successfully undergone multiple reviews by the Historic Preservation Commission in connection with the renovations. Both have received mayor's awards, and both have been featured in the Chamber's Christmas walks. Both properties were designated historic prior to our purchases. We understood what that meant, as well as what their presence in the Downtown Historic District meant. We made the choice for those properties as well as their location for various reasons, but one of them was that there were regulations constraining what renovations and construction could be done around us. We and our properties have benefited from those constraints. I feel certain that the current appeal of the Geneva downtown is largely the result of our HPC regulations. I much respect the city administration and the council for undertaking review and update of our historic preservation regulations at a time that we know there is disagreement within our community. I appreciate that the Historic Preservation Commission and city planners, especially Michael Lambert, have reviewed other like-minded cities, conducted hearings, reviewed legalities, and heard from us on all of these. Hopefully, the current intensity of feelings has meant that the issues have been heard well and addressed in a manner which will serve us for the next few decades. It is understandable that owner non-consent would concern us. Unrestricted teardowns concern those who drafted the original historic preservation rules. Deleting this tool now will likely lead to owners of historic properties being able to rescind their designations. Down the road, some may even be able to remove themselves from historic districts. Then the teardowns will commence, and the we who are living here then will watch in horror and financial loss. Owner non-consent allowed the saving of the Fabian Laboratory and office properties, and then parentheses he says Riverbank property. Compliance with the HP regulations, red consent, delivered the beautiful renovations of Riverbank by the Hackendalls. Owner compliance gave us the Shodine-built homes between South and Franklin, the Harrington Inn and Spa, and now the new homes on 5th and Campbell, and so forth. I strongly request that you retain this tool for the future character of Geneva. Respectfully, Ernie Mahaffey.
I think it might be in everyone's best interest if council members have something to read or present on behalf of someone who's asked you to do so. Perhaps we do that right now. Alderman Bruno?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Nice and loud, Alderman Bruno. Well done.
This is from constituent Ernie Mahaffey at 18 South, or Colin Campbell at 18 South 6th Street in Geneva here. He had some neck surgery this afternoon and couldn't be here, so he's asked me to read this in. From Ernie, or excuse me, from Colin. We are being told by some that by not requiring a property owner's consent to landmark and historic building, the Geneva city government is denying that owner the right to do whatever they personally wish with their property, and that you, the government, are overstepping your bounds by unfairly dictating what a property owner can and cannot do. This argument ignores several important facts. First, this community in which we have chosen to live also has rights. And as a basic principle of our democratic form of government, we elect you to mediate and ultimately decide on the best balance between the community's rights and the individual's rights. If you are no longer able to represent your community in a case involving historic preservation, you will have lost the ability to protect Geneva's overall interests should such a situation ever arise. It is the basic principle of our democracy that the majority rules, but respect the rights of the minority or the individual. That does not mean giving either the majority or the minority any and everything they want. It does mean offering everyone due process. Regarding the issue of landmarking, the draft ordinance that you have before you offers due process and more through multiple layers of protection and rights to appeal by the individual property owner. It is more than fair, but it still offers a means by which our community can protect its historic heritage if need be. It is a part of your mandate as our elected representatives to make these decisions, It is our responsibility as citizens to make our wishes known to you, to utilize the democratic process available to us, but in the end, accept your decisions as being made in good faith and in the best overall interest for Geneva, whether we personally agree or disagree with a given decision. That is a part of the implied contract that we all agree to when we choose to live in a community. The City of Geneva, got lost. The City of Geneva, got lost again. Jumping around. The City of Geneva, along with almost every other city in the U.S., already carefully regulates exactly what property owners may and may not do with their own property through very specific and restrictive zoning ordinances and building code. No one seriously questions the need for or the right of the city to do this. By the same token, the people of Geneva have repeatedly asked you to preserve our historic buildings. Every survey of the citizens of Geneva regarding what they deem most important in our city ranks historic preservation at or very near the top. Notwithstanding the enormous pressure that is being brought to bear on you by relatively few people right now, the vast majority of Genevans have spoken clearly on this subject multiple times. Let's look at the actual reality of the situation. The current landmarking ordinance has been in effect in Geneva for some 3 decades, and it has been used only once in all that time to save historic and beautiful riverbank, mansion, and laboratory buildings. Bear with me. The owners of that property intended to demolish those buildings, which it can be argued were the birthplace of America's intelligence agencies. But when faced with the fact that the City of Geneva had the ability to halt the destruction, they changed their minds and assisted in their rehabilitation and preservation. Had we not had the ability to landmark without owner consent, we would no longer have those historically important and beautiful buildings on South Batavia Avenue. And a vital part of Geneva's history and heart would have been irretrievably lost. Last year, when threatened with the demolition of the Dryden home on Sunset Road, the possibility of landmarking that building was explored by neighbors who feared the effect that the new construction would have on the neighborhood in which they already live. Because the landmarking ordinance was not specific and had not been used in decades, the result was unnecessary confusion and hardship for both the residents of the neighborhood and the property owner. However, in actual fact, in the end, no application for landmarking was ever filed. One positive result of this is the restructured ordinance that you have before you tonight. It corrects the deficiencies of the old ordinance and actually enhances the protections offered to the property owner while still allowing the city to preserve an historic building, should it ever actually need to. Much has been said about educating property owners about the value of preservation rather than requiring them to preserve an historic building. I agree with the value of education and have advocated and practiced it for years. But what if, for example, a person buys an important and historic building, borrows money to open a new business, and after a couple of tough years that business fails? It is quite possible that when the owner declares bankruptcy, some out-of-town bank with no ties to Geneva will foreclose and take possession of the property. Let's say that the bank then decides that their best financial decision is to demolish the building and sell the lot. I would suggest that for an out-of-town owner who cares nothing about Geneva and everything about their bottom line, all of the education in the world would not convince them to save the building. This ordinance, as is now written, would give the City of Geneva the essential tool that it needs to encourage that owner to seriously consider Geneva's needs as well as their own. Therefore, I urge you to accept the ordinance as it is currently written. I think the protections that it offers the property owner and the history of how this ordinance has been used to date clearly demonstrate that it cannot and will not be misused by the people of Geneva or you, our elected government, and that many of the fears about government overreach expressed and implied here tonight are baseless. I hope that you will decide these issues on the basis of fact and reason and what is best overall for the community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You have a copy you can forward to
I
Gene
will
as well.
forward that.
Anyone else who has anything to read on behalf of someone who's requested they do so? From the dais, anyone wishing to make a comment, statement, ask a question? Alderman Singer?
Yes. Is it appropriate for me to ask questions regarding the issues here before me, regarding notification fees as such?
Absolutely.
Okay. Michael or David, on page 22, landmark designation, odor notification. You suggest that within 5 working days of the filing of an application, whether or not deemed complete, the preservation planner shall notify in writing and by certified mail the owner of record of the property considered for designation as a historic landmark. Do you not request, or should you not request, that the owner of record also respond within a specific date? Is that essential?
I don't know that it's essential. I mean, we have the certified mail return receipt to be certain that they've received the notice, but that's certainly something that could be added.
Well, certified mail means that the person received the notification, then does he not have a specific period of time in which he must respond to that notification?
We don't have that built into the ordinance as is.
I think the question would also come to receiving certified mail as to who's signing for it and whether or not they are the agent in charge of making decisions and what time, especially consider a trust, for instance, that may have out-of-state or even out-of-country owners. Imposing a time limit may actually diminish their rights to respond if they have to respond, say, in 30 days, and they can't get that information from an out-of-country or an out-of-state owner of a trust or multiple owners of a property. That's just one example. So I don't know if that achieves, if that's something you're trying to achieve, we can look into it, but I'm not sure that that's practical.
Landmark designation fees, page 24. You commented moments ago, Michael, about the application fee, suggesting here it be $1,000. Your suggestion was certainly shouldn't be that stiff. However, is there does the applicant, if the costs do not exceed that amount of $1,000 for whatever the processing is, would there be a refund then?
That's correct. As proposed, it would be a $1,000 deposit, and then we would draw against that deposit to cover actual costs, and anything left over at the end would be refunded to the applicant.
And just to clarify, I wasn't suggesting that necessarily a smaller or lesser fee was required. I just want to let everyone here in this room know that I could not find an application fee that equated to the amount that we're requesting. So we are asking for a pretty hefty fee compared to other ordinances in other communities.
Page 31, well, no, we're going to refer to that. I've got to find the other page here. Bear with me, please. What constitutes a neighborhood conservation district? What defines that? How is that defined?
The first step in defining a neighborhood conservation district, once somebody asked about one, would be to actually do a survey of the area and determine what makes that area unique. Again, the phrase out of the enabling legislation is special historic character. That's the general enabling legislation for all historic preservation. And so for each area, it would vary. So for instance, take an example outside of Geneva, but that would certainly apply to an area of Geneva. If you have a working class neighborhood that is still, the working class housing is still surrounding the main mill or the main industrial concern, there may be a very distinct historic character between that industrial concern and the worker housing that was around it. That's one example. So again, there's different, the thing about neighborhood conservation districts is the survey would create a set of parameters that would define what that district should be and should include. And that is why when, again, when it was asked about a particular area, there is no current survey. Even the 2002 survey that was done is now 13 years out of date and would need to be resurveyed and relooked at that area even.
Could the district then very likely be gerrymandered in some manner? It wouldn't necessarily constitute a block or 2 block squares or 3 block squares or such?
It could be as small as 2 blocks according to our definition,
Okay,
but it
that's
could
what
be.
I was looking for.
But it could be larger. And again, it would depend on what feeds into that criteria based out of a survey. So again, a neighborhood conservation district really needs to be surveyed to determine what that area consists of. I'm not trying to evade your answer, but there's not a prescribed, rubric that says this is what makes up a neighborhood conservation district.
Okay, now on page 31, neighborhood conservation districts. You would assist individual residents and their neighbors who would like to have protection and work towards rehabilitation of all or parts of a neighborhood conservation district to establish a historic district in order to be able to take advantage of preservation-based incentives. Now we go over to page 28, and it says, the current historic preservation ordinance does not contain a provision for the designation of a neighborhood conservation district. The study I get the impression that there's some contradiction here from the way I read this. Apparently, I'm not interpreting it properly. The study area contained, if it contains too many structures that have been converted to synthetic sidings, therefore would not meet the recommendations of a National Registration Historical District. So I don't totally understand that.
For an area to be considered for a historic district, less than 50% of the buildings may be covered with synthetic siding. So that is a regulation of looking at a National Register district. That's just their baseline. So a conservation district may be 100% covered with synthetic siding, but have historic buildings that are still there. And so again, the conservation district would allow or a designated conservation district would be allowed there even in spite of the synthetic siding. Does that answer part of your question? I think you've got two parts. Okay. The other question I think you were starting to ask was about rehabilitating towards a historic district. We've heard a lot talked about education, and that's one of the things that is probably the most prevalent in conservation districts. It really opens up a dialogue with the neighborhood to discuss specific elements. It was said earlier that someone couldn't put new vinyl windows in a conservation district the way the ordinance is written, but in actuality, that is one of the things that would be allowed. What would be looked at is, for instance, if someone wanted to replace their windows in a conservation district where perhaps in the historic district wood windows would be required, we would look at windows with new different materials as long as the historic window opening wasn't altered irreversibly in the process. And we would look for things such as similar window operations. So if it was a double-hung window in the historic building, they may look at a double-hung window made of vinyl rather than wood, rather than installing casement windows, which would change the character of the neighborhood and change the character of the building.
When we talk about owner consent, are we in referencing to the people who reside within that structure to make that particular decision as consenting to the direction that they feel comfortable with? Now, how do you go about getting these people in the sense, you're going to have a form of a vote? How do you go about structuring that? I mean, are the voters going to be registered?
I'm sorry, I'm not following your whole question, I'm sorry.
I think, Alderman Singer, you're referring to the establishment of a district to the
Correct.
51%?
Correct.
And are you asking that if those 51%, whether they opt out or opt in, do they have to be registered voters?
That's correct.
Short answer is no.
Correct. They would
They have to be property owners. Yeah.
It must be property owners.
Correct.
Okay. And who is responsible for the cost of that election or voting process?
I would assume that'd be the municipality based on the direction of the,
It's not an election or a vote. I don't know if David wants to describe the process more.
Explain that to me. I don't understand.
If the application was initiated by the Historic Preservation Commission and City Council, it would be the city paying the cost of that notification. If it was another applicant, they would be required out of that deposit to cover the cost of sending out the mailings and notifying the public of the meeting, of the public hearing.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
folks, we're beyond the bewitching hour. Via Robert's Rules of Order, a motion to postpone would be in order. However, a motion to postpone could not take place while Alderman Singer had the floor. If it is the will of this committee to offer a motion to postpone may be offered. It has to be seconded. It can be debated, but it has to be postponed until a date certain at the next regularly scheduled meeting. Alderman Radecki and I discussed this earlier. Regrettably, it has to be to June 8th. It cannot be beyond June 8th. So, yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we postpone further discussion of this to the date certain of June 8th.
Second.
It's now debatable whether or not this committee wishes to so postpone or continue this evening. I have my opinion, but Alderman Radecki, on the motion to postpone?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, I have a pre-planned vacation long before the election even took place. I'm not trying to duck this, for June 8th. And I'm wondering if there isn't some mechanism or some way that this, that we can get the benefit of the full council to have input and to cast a vote on something of this magnitude and this importance.
It's my opinion that a vote would not be taken until there is a full house. I think that is important. We've done that before. While we can continue the discussion, I would highly recommend that a formal vote on whether it be any of these issues or in its entirety not be taken until the full council is present. That's my opinion.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate that, but I would go one further and say that the full discussion should also take place.
Unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to delay it beyond June 8th.
But can a motion be made at that meeting to
It can be.
postpone it again?
On June 8th, a motion can be offered to postpone yet again.
Can we have a special cow meeting on June 1st to continue the discussion?
We can.
That would be my
Well, actually, let me clarify. The next meeting,
Which would be June 1st.
whatever we decide, yeah. Correct? You go with special?
It just seems to me to make sense that while we have the momentum of the discussion and it's fresh, that it not be postponed for a couple of weeks also. And if everybody's going to be here and we're willing to participate again, it would seem to me that, personally, I would rather just keep going while we have the momentum in the room right now, but I understand we're not going to do that. But the next best thing to me would be to pick it up as soon as possible.
If everyone's in agreement to have a June 1st special committee of the whole meeting, because it's also a city council meeting evening, so we'll have two, but based on the unanimous votes earlier tonight, that council meeting will be a breeze. We can have a special committee of the whole meeting, again, to take up only this matter on June 1st. If there's no objection,
Object to that.
No objection.
Alderman Simonia, this is on the debate to postpone.
Yeah, no, I'm going to object. I don't think we should be changing schedules due to, no disrespect, vacations or anything like that. I think it opens up a can of worms for future dates. We did not make we didn't do it when we talked about a majority vote when a certain number of council folks weren't here. I don't think we should alter, the rules based off of vacation schedules. That's my personal thought. No disrespect, I understand.
Well, let me clarify
Alderman
my
Becky.
comments then. Let me disregard the comment about vacations. What does this committee feel about picking up the discussion in 7 days rather than 14? It would seem to be more meaningful, more fresh. All the comments could be considered a lot better in 7 days than 14.
Well, and realistically, it could very well be postponed again on the 1st to the 8th, so. Again, it's up to the will of the committee.
I'm good with the special count.
Alderman Maladra?
Well, I would favor talking about it on the 1st, not because any one of us is going to be on vacation on the 8th, but, so I'm concerned that if we continue tonight, the quality of the conversation is going to deteriorate with every half hour that we stay.
Kind of like it is now?
I believe that if we pick it up and seize the momentum that we have built up, if we wait too long, we'll start to lose that, and we'll rehash some of what we spent the last 3 hours going through. So if we can pick up on the 1st, we'll limit the rehashing, and we'll pick up where we left off.
Anyone else from the dais? The motion on the floor is to the 8th. Would somebody like to amend the motion?
I will amend my motion to defer this further discussion here until a special COW meeting on June 1st.
Is there a second? Second. Main motion's on the floor as amended. Any other discussion?
Point of order? Does it necessitate a voice vote or a?
Well, we're going to take a roll call vote.
All right.
Yeah. On the amendment. On the amendment to June 1st. Alderman Simonian?
Can I make a comment?
Of course.
About that meeting?
Yes.
The content of that meeting now?
Yes.
I would recommend, my fellow council members, I went through this document, the 50-something pages, and if we start picking the fly poop out of the pepper here, I can spend 2 hours going through every word and tell you what I don't like and everything else. I personally think there's 3 subjects here that are concerned. The Conservation District, the districts in the 51%, whether it's dissenting or supportive in that vote, and then owner consent. And I'd like to stay, if possible, at 30,000 feet and get the support of how we feel on those subjects. And once the direction is taken, then start getting into the weeds of, because I think if we work backwards, we're going to be here for 2 more months, meeting after meeting after meeting, going through line item by line item, which HPC has already done. I think it's more to find out, is the council supporting these 3 initiatives or these 3 issues? That's just my thoughts?
It certainly can be. I mean, as we look at the screen above, we've all received correspondence from a number of residents who have asked the very question. If I am progressing on a redevelopment or a reconstruction and a landmarking is filed, who will recoup my costs? Do I have to stop? So that addresses specifically the suspension of work issue. I just want to make certain we don't gloss over other issues that, while we may not think is important, we know that based on the hundreds of emails we've gotten, someone finds that important.
Right, but if the owner consent issue is either agreed upon or disagreed upon, a lot of that other stuff
It might.
goes away. So in other words, working from the bottom up, discussing whether demolition is approved or not approved, or when, and days, and everything else, may be a moot point if owner consent is, is passed.
Well, the motion on the
so-
table is to postpone this meeting until June 1. We can discuss internally the structure of that meeting, if you will. I just don't want anyone to leave this meeting, whether they be proponents or opponents, saying, well, I got what I wanted, or I didn't get what I wanted, but God, nothing else was really touched on, and are there more what-ifs in there? That's my fear. I mean, let's face it, since 1982, non-owner consent was in there, a lot of us didn't probably know that.
I agree.
On the motion to postpone till June 1, any additional comments? Right. This is on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Main motion as amended, we're going to postpone this meeting until June 1. We'll do a voice vote since I sense this where it's going. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The meeting will begin at 7 PM on June 1st, immediately following the city council meeting. Let the record show as well that all the email correspondence that I've received and that the council has received, including the postcards, have been shared with the council. The most recent batch went out today at 3 o'clock. Those batches are no longer going to the Historic Preservation Commission, since they are no longer adjudicating this discussion. We are. We all have that. That'll be part of the official record as well. It's my intent that we will have a copy of the minutes by June 1 with all this stuff attached, so hundreds and hundreds of pages, so, yeah, so. Anything else for the benefit of the community or committee? Anyone at all? Yes, Mrs. Ellis? You have to join us at the podium, unfortunately, because people at home are anxiously awaiting to hear what people have to say, so, sorry about that.
I just want to be clear, at the June 1 meeting, there's going to be a discussion and a vote?
I can't guarantee a vote, no. There will be a discussion the discussion will begin with the committee of the whole members.
Okay,
Yeah. Whether there's a vote or not, I don't know.
okay, that's what I want to know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A motion to adjourn is in order? So moved. Motion by Marks, seconded by Sino. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Cameras are off, microphones are off.
Show up.